He took Frankie by the hand. "Oh my God! What the fuck is that?" Frankie said, as she spotted an animal with horns walking towards her. Jed giggled. The ease they had taken were fucking strong. "It's a ram, you dinlo! What the fuck did you think it was? An elephant?" Frankie was laughing hysterically as they traipsed across the field. Jed opened the door of his trailer and they fell into one another's arms. The sex on an E was sensational, and they were at it hammer and tongs for hours. Finally, Frankie gently pushed Jed away. She was sore down below and needed a break. "Can I have a look around?" she asked him. So far, all she had seen of the trailer was the bedroom. Jed poured them both a pint of water and smiled as she took in the surroundings. Frankie had no knowledge of travellers before she'd met Jed, and the way they lived intrigued her. "Why have you got so much china?" she asked him. Jed laughed. "'Cause me mother decorated it for me. She collects china, and because she's run out of room indoors, she now stores it in mine." Frankie stared intently at the plates decorating the wall. They were beautiful, and had horses pulling pretty little gypsy carts. "You ever been on a horse and cart?" Jed asked her. Frankie smiled. "No. Why? Have you?" Jed chuckled. "Course I have, you dinlo! I used to race the bloody things. Tell you what, daylight's breaking now. Shall I harness one up and take you out for a ride?" Frankie burst out laughing. "Go on then, let's do it." At 5:30 a.m, Jed and Frankie trotted off down the road. "Hey up!" Jed shouted, as he whipped the filly on the arse. "I love where you live. Your life's so exciting, Jed. My house is so boring. It's nothing like yours." Jed held both reins in his right hand. He put his left arm around Frankie. "Move in with me." "I can't. My dad'll kill me," Frankie replied immediately. "Tell him about us. I ain't frightened of your father, and neither should you be. He's going to find out we're together one day, ain't he?" Frankie sighed. "Yeah, I know. But not yet. You don't know my dad. He'll go mental. I know he will." Approaching a bend, Jed held the reins back in both hands. "Trot on," he said, making a funny clicking noise with his mouth. Thinking of her dad gave Frankie the heebie-jeebies, so he drove along and saw her. Feeling worried all of a sudden, she laid her head on Jed's shoulder. "I'm cold. Can we go back now? I haven't got to be home yet. We can go back to bed if you like." Jed turned his head and kissed her gently on the lips. "I bet you marry me within a year. I'll bet you anything you like." Frankie burst out laughing. Jed oozed so much confidence. He had such a glow you could almost warm your hands on him. Poking her tongue out, Frankie snatched the reins out of Jed's hands. "Trot on!" she yelled. "Trot on!" Jimmy O'Hara had never been a man to lie in bed of a morning. His Alice was the same, and they had their own little routines. Alice would get up like a good wife should and clean the house till it sparkled. Jimmy would feed the animals and do the dirty jobs, which men were supposed to do. As he saw the horse and cart pull onto the drive, Jimmy's eyes widened. He had been aware of a horse trotting about earlier, but thought he had dreamed it. Seeing Jed jump off the cart, he threw down the bucket he was holding and moved nearer to see who the pretty little filly was. He'd seen the girl before. She definitely looked familiar, but she didn't look like a travelling girl. His Jed was a dark horse. Jimmy had guessed by Jed's recent behaviour that he'd met a bird he liked, but Jed had said very little about her. Jimmy sneaked around the back of his house so he could get a closer peek. Seeing Frankie not 20 yards from him, realisation crept in, and Jimmy smiled with such gusto it nearly pushed his teeth out. "It's fucking Eddie Mitchell's girl," Jimmy whispered, as he ducked down, desperate not to be seen. As Jed shut the door of his trailer, Jimmy stood up. Unable to stop himself, he laughed out loud. Eddie Mitchell was one flash bastard, and wiping the smile off his smarmy face would make Jimmy the happiest man in the universe. Chapter 35. Eddie was in a foul mood the following day. "Where's the twins?" he asked Jess. Jessica shrugged. "They're not back yet. I think they stayed round their friend's house. Ed glared at her. What do you mean, you think? It's your duty to know where they are. I've told you time and time again to keep tabs on them. You're far too fucking lenient, Jess. I do keep tabs on them, but just lately they've been a bit secretive. I've a feeling our Frankie's got a boyfriend, and Joey's covering up for her, Jessica said honestly. Your parenting skills leave a lot to be desired. Best you find out what Frankie's up to, because if she comes home pregnant, I'll crucify her and fucking blame you, Ed shouted, as he slammed the kitchen door. The twins finally arrived home at Saturday tea time. Desperate to know the truth about Joey, Eddie tried to call Gina, but her mobile was switched off. Bollocks, Ed shouted, chucking his phone against the wall. The not knowing was torture. At least once he had some proof, he could do something about it. On the Sunday morning, Jessica had a list of jobs for Ed to do, and it wasn't until lunchtime, when her parents arrived, that Eddie had a chance to escape. Right, I'll vac your car and tidied up the garden. You're okay with your parents for a bit, aren't you? I'm going to take the dogs out for a run. Jessica gave him a dubious look. He never usually took Buster and Bruno for a run. The last time he had, there'd been a murder, and the police had come knocking on the door. You're not going far, are you? How long will you be? Jessica asked him suspiciously. I dunno. For fuck's sake, Jess, I've worked me bollocks off all morning. Give us a break, will you? Jessica felt uneasy as he left the house. She could always tell when Eddie had something on his mind, and she was sure he was up to no good. He'd been in a funny mood for days now, and certainly wasn't his chirpy self. Bored with sitting with Stanley, Joyce walked into the kitchen. Let me help you, dear. Shall I peel some potatoes or veg for you? You go and sit in the lounge with Dad. Everything's under control, Mum. I can't sit in there with your father. Been doing me head in all weekend, he has. Just got himself a new cock, innit? It's all he talks about. Called it Willie, he has, as a tribute to Willie Carson. I mean, how can you call a cock Willie? Ain't normal, is it, Jess? Jessica burst out laughing. Her mother was hilarious, and she didn't even realise it. There you are. Is Joey still in bed? Jessica asked, as Frankie suddenly appeared. Kissing her nan, Frankie flopped onto a chair. She didn't want to be stuck in all day. She wanted to be out with Jed, but wasn't sure how to broach the subject. Joey's getting up now, Mum. I know we're having dinner and all that, but do you mind if I go out afterwards? Jessica felt her hackles rise. Frankie was always out lately, and Jessica barely saw her. Sometimes she stayed out all night, and Jessica had a feeling that she'd met a boy and was up to Christ knows what. Will it hurt you to stay in for one day? Gary and Ricky are coming over, so are Raymond and Polly. This is meant to be a celebration for you and Joey leaving school. Yeah, I know, and I do appreciate it. But it's one of my friends' birthdays today, and we're all meant to be going bowling. Please say I can go, Mum. I haven't got to go till after dinner. Do as you like, Frankie. I don't care any more, Jessica said bluntly. Her daughter was a selfish little cow, and she was beginning to lose patience with her behaviour. As Joey walked in, Frankie slunk into the lounge to see her grandfather. Mum, Joey, go and sit in the front room. I'll be in myself in a minute, Jessica said. Her kitchen was enormous, but somehow people still managed to get under her feet. Stanley told the twins all about his new cock. My Willie's a beauty. Faster than the speed of light he is. My mates down at the Pigeon Club are so jealous. 2 of them have already tried to buy him off me. They say he's the best cock they've ever seen. Frankie giggled. I'm sure Joey would like to see him, Grandad. He likes pigeons, especially cocks, don't you, Joey? Really? Why don't I pick you up in a week, Joey? You can come round and see him, Stanley enthused. That would be lovely, Grandad, Joey lied, glaring at his sister. Deciding to get his own back, Joey turned to his nan. Do you think our Frankie looks like a gypsy, Nan? We was in a pub the other day and this travelling girl came up to us. She said she was positive that our Frankie had a bit of gypsy in her. Joyce was furious. Of course she don't. Christ, she don't look like one of them tinkers. Never trusted the bastards, I ain't. Years ago, when your mum was little, I had one knock on me front door. She was selling Lucky Heather, and when I refused to buy any, she told me that bad luck was coming my way. The next morning I got up, tripped down the stairs and broke me bloody arm. Even to this day I swear she put a curse on me. Evil bastards they are. If you have the misfortune of meeting one again, don't have nothing to do with them, will you?" Joey smirked at his sister. "Of course not, Nan. We wouldn't dream of having any dealings with gypsies, would we, Frankie?" Eddie Mitchell tied the dogs to the wooden table and went inside the Optimist to get a drink. His mouth was as dry as a nun's crotch, and he didn't know whether it was due to the hot weather or the impending phone call he had to make. Eddie thanked the barmaid and went back outside. Buster and Bruno were lying on their backs, having their stomachs tickled by some old boy in a trilby hat. "Good guard dogs you're going to be," Eddie muttered, as he walked towards the table. He'd been training them to growl and bark at strangers, not lie on their backs with their legs up in the air. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" the man in the hat commented to Eddie. "Wonderful, mate," Eddie replied sarcastically. He was too worried about his gay son to get involved in pointless small talk. As the man walked away, Eddie downed his whiskey chaser in one. His heart was pumping 19 to the dozen at the thought of what he might be about to hear. He rang Gina's number and took a deep breath as she answered. "Well?" he asked, trying to sound calm. "I have all the information you wanted, Mr. Smith, including photographs." "What did you find out?" Eddie asked abruptly. "I'll tell you everything when we meet up. I did an 18-hour stint to find out all the information you required. I now need to arrange collection for the remainder of the money I'm owed." "Can I meet you now? Please, my mate's desperate to find out the score," Eddie pleaded. "Well, it's a bit awkward. I have to attend a function at 3 o'clock at a friend's house." "I'll meet you now. Anywhere that suits you. I'll pay you extra. Make it worth your while." Gina sighed. Mr. Smith was a very generous but difficult client, and due to her crush on him she couldn't say no. "My friend lives in Benfleet. Do you know the tar pots? I can meet you there at 2:45. "I'll be there," Eddie responded immediately. Overcome by anxiety, Eddie got himself another pint and a whiskey chaser. He didn't know what he was going to say to Jessica. With everyone due around for dinner, she was bound to go apeshit at him. As Buster and Bruno tried to clamber up his leg, he sipped his drink and stroked their heads. "Why is my life so fucking difficult, boys? Used to have got it easy. When I die, I'm coming back as a fucking dog." Jessica basted the roast potatoes and slammed the oven doors shut. Where the bloody hell had Eddie got to? "All right to get another beer, Jess?" Gary asked. "Help yourself, love. Can you make sure everyone's got a drink for me? Christ knows where your father is. He was only taking the dogs for a run. He's been gone nearly 2 hours. I can't do everything, Gary. I'm trying to cook the bloody dinner." Gary squeezed Jessica's arm. "You just concentrate on the food and I'll deal with everything else. Once I've sorted the drinks out, I'll give the old man a ring, see where he's got to." "Thanks, love. I already tried to ring him twice, but he's not answering his phone," Jessica said gratefully. Shouting at the dogs to stop yelping, Eddie sped down the A13. Aware that his phone was ringing yet again, he answered it. "Where are you, Dad? Jess has got the right needle," Gary informed him. Eddie didn't want anyone to know where he was going. "I've lost one of the dogs, gal. Buster bolted into the woods and I'm hunting for him now." "Me and Ricky'll come and help you find him," Gary offered. "No, don't worry. I've got a couple of dog walkers helping me. Look, do us a favour, son. I don't want to upset the kids, so tell Jess on the quiet. I won't come back till I've found him. He can't have gone far." Gary ended the call and went to find Jessica to explain. "I can't understand why he took 'em out in the car in the first place. We're inundated with fields around here. Where has he taken them?" Gary shrugged. "He didn't exactly say, but he mentioned the woods." Jessica thanked Gary and began cutting the meat. Her husband's story sounded a little bit too far-fetched for her liking. Not sure where they were supposed to be meeting, Eddie rang Gina as he drove into Benfleet. "Follow the road straight down and the pub comes up on your right. I'm sitting in the car park in a black Nissan Micra," Gina told him. Eddie spotted her immediately and parked right next to her. "What have you got?" he asked, as he squeezed his big frame into her small passenger seat. Gina handed him Dominic's name and address. Your friend's suspicions were correct, she said, getting straight to the point. Where's the photos? Eddie asked, his heart feeling like a lump of lead. Gina handed him a sealed envelope. Your friend might want to look at these in private, Mr. Smith, she said diplomatically. Eddie nodded and handed her a wad of money. There's 1,600 quid there. 15 that I promised you and a one on top for meeting me today. You've paid me far too much. Please, take some back, Gina urged. Her heart was beating like a drum, as she'd never been so close to him before. Eddie opened the car door. You keep it, love, but promise me. What you saw, you'll never breathe a word. My pal's an important geezer and he wouldn't be happy if any of this got out. You have my word, and my word is my bond. I can guarantee you your friend has nothing to worry about. I work in a very clandestine manner, Mr. Smith. Watching Gina drive away, Eddie decided to head back nearer to home before he opened the envelope. He would probably write his Land Cruiser off down the A13 if he opened it in Benfleet. Dreading what the contents held, Eddie started the engine and sped off like a loony. Annoyed that her day had been thoroughly spoilt, Jessica barely touched her dinner. You not hungry, Mum? Joey asked, concerned. No, love. Has everyone finished? I'll take the plates out. Would you like me to give you a hand? Polly asked politely. That's a first. You don't usually lift a cup, Raymond joked. With Polly's help, Jessica cleared the table and organised the dessert. If Ed wasn't home by the time the strawberry pavlova was eaten, then sod him. She would announce her good news alone. I don't want afters. Is it all right if I go out now, Mum? Frankie whinged. No, it's not. Sit down and shut up for 5 minutes, Jessica spat back. I don't think I like that, dear. What's it called? Stanley asked, pointing to the dessert. Pavlova! You always have to be awkward, Stanley, don't you? Joyce said. Don't worry, Dad. I've got a blackberry crumble as well. Just waiting for it to warm up. I forgot to turn the oven back on again. Half an hour later, everybody was full to the brim. Thanks, Jess, that was lovely, Ricky remarked, as he helped his stepmum take the dishes out to the kitchen. So how's your father's business doing, Polly? Has he been affected by this recession at all? Joyce asked nosily. Stanley felt sorry for his son's girlfriend. For the past hour, all Joyce had done was give her the 3rd degree. For goodness sake, woman, can't you change the subject? He said bravely. Shut up and mind your own business, Joyce snapped back. Jessica handed 2 bottles of champagne to Ricky and told him to open them. Handing everybody a champagne flute, Jessica topped up their glasses. Is this to toast my wonderful grandchildren? Stanley asked, winking at the twins. Jessica smiled. She felt sad that Eddie wasn't here to join in, but Frankie was waiting to go out, so what could she do? Urging Joey and Frankie to stand up, Jessica grinned at them. My little babies have now left school and are about to start looking for jobs. To Frankie and Joey, we all wish you every success in your future, she proclaimed. To Frankie and Joey, everyone repeated. Frankie knocked her champagne straight back. She was aching to see Jed. Can I go out now, Mum? She asked cheekily. Jessica hated giving speeches. Eddie was good at them, but she wasn't, and even felt nervous in front of her close family. Urging Frankie to sit back down, Jessica cleared her throat. I've got some news of my own. I know Mum and Joey have both commented on me putting on a bit of weight recently. Well, there is a reason for this. I'm pregnant. Eddie and I are going to be parents again, and Joey and Frankie are going to have a little brother or sister. An expert at overacting, Joyce leapt up and down like a kangaroo. That's wonderful! Oh, Stanley, we're going to be grandparents again, she squealed with delight. Congratulations, dear, Stanley said in a monotone voice. He still didn't like Eddie, never had and never would. He loved his grandchildren, though, and would certainly welcome another. Joey turned to Frankie and pretended to put his fingers down the back of his throat. It's disgusting. How old are they? I hope they don't expect us to wipe its arse and babysit, 'cause I won't, Frankie whispered to her brother. Aware that the twins' reaction hadn't been one of utter joy, Jessica spoke softly to them. "You'll always be Mummy's favourites. You were my firstborn," she assured them. "Ain't you a bit old?" Joey asked her bluntly. "Don't expect me to look after it," Frankie chipped in. Jessica smiled. They were probably a bit jealous, bless them. She was sure they would get used to the idea once the baby was born, and would make wonderful siblings for him or her. "Go on, you can go out now, Frankie. Are you going out as well, Joey?" "Yep," Joey said, as he shoved Frankie out of the room. A screaming brat in the house was the last thing either of them needed. Raymond hugged his sister. "Me and Polly are thrilled for you," he said kindly. "Who wants more champagne? Me and Ricky are going to be brothers again, and that deserves a celebration on its own. Done it, bruv?" Gary said. Ricky agreed and gave Jessica a squeeze. "Gal, ring Dad again. See where he is," he ordered his brother. Not wanting anyone listening in, Gary wandered out into the garden and rang his dad's number. Unbeknown to Jessica, he'd been ringing him for the last hour, but couldn't get any response. The more he thought about the Buster story, the more he knew his dad had been lying. "What the fuck is going on?" Gary said out loud, as once again he received no answer. Unbeknownst to Gary, Eddie was back in the Optimist. Finishing his fourth pint, Ed untied the dog's leads. He was dreading looking in that envelope. He knew by Gina's voice and face that the contents were bad news, but it was now or never, and he had to know the truth. Lifting the dogs into the back of the Land Cruiser, he sat in the driver's seat and ripped the envelope open. As Eddie stared at the picture of his son kissing Dominic, he repeatedly smashed his fist against the steering wheel. Taking a deep breath, he looked at the rest. The worst one was the last one. His son, his own flesh and blood, had his hand placed on Dominic's cobblers. Aware of a watery taste in his mouth, Eddie opened his door and retched his guts up. Conscious of a couple looking at him, Eddie started the engine and sped off. He stopped in a lay-by in the middle of nowhere and got out of the motor again. Furious, he banged his head against the passenger door. "Fuck! Fuck! Fuck!" he screamed. Distraught, Eddie got back into the motor. Fishing through his pockets, he found Dominic's address. Islington the bastard lived, and his name was Dominic King. Eddie restarted the engine. "More like Queen, not fucking King," he mumbled. Heading towards another pub, Eddie took deep breaths. He couldn't go home yet. He needed to calm himself down first. He mustn't let Jessica, Raymond, or anyone clock onto his findings. He had to act normal. It was the only way. Tomorrow, he would pay this Dominic a visit. He would give him King. He would dethrone the cunt. Chapter 36. Jessica was furious with her husband's behaviour, and as he made an appearance the following morning, she neither glanced at nor spoke to him. He'd eventually come home around midnight. She had been in bed, but had heard the dogs barking and him staggering about downstairs. She knew he was drunk. It wasn't often Eddie got like that now, but she could always tell when he was by the amount of noise he made and the length of time it took him to reach the top of the stairs. Something was troubling him. She knew that. Eddie hadn't been himself for weeks, and Jessica wondered if he had raked up some new information about his father's murder. He hadn't even slept in their bedroom, but had gone into the spare room. As Jessica banged the kettle against the worktop, Eddie stopped eating his cereal and tried to cuddle her. "I'm sorry about yesterday. It took me hours to find Buster and then something else cropped up. I'll make it up to your mum and dad, I promise. Got a lot on my plate at the moment, I have, Jess." Jessica was angry. Men were so full of themselves at times. "And so have I, Ed. I've got a lot on my plate as well. Have you forgotten that I'm carrying our third child? I'm sick of clearing up after everyone here. The twins don't lift a finger, and since you brought them dogs home, the place is a tip. Full of hairs it is, and now I have to clean twice a day instead of once. Also, I'm worried about Frankie. I know she's turned 16 now, but I don't like her staying out all night. I'm sure she's got a boyfriend she's not telling us about. I asked her outright the other day, but she denied it, of course." Eddie felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He had enough problems with Joey without Frankie being at it as well. Joey, walking into the kitchen, stopped the conversation dead. "Morning, Mum. Morning, Dad, Joey said brightly. The sight of his son put Eddie off the remainder of his cornflakes. Joey disgusted him, and he would never forget those photographs as long as he lived. Do you want me to make you some breakfast, love? Jessica asked Joey. Not really hungry, Mum. You got any fruit? I fancy a banana. Remembering the snap where Joey had his hand around his boyfriend's nether regions, Eddie threw his cornflakes into the bin and stomped upstairs. What's up with him? Yous two had a row? Joey asked his mum. Jessica shrugged. I don't know what's the matter with him. Don't worry, it can't be anything to do with you, Joey. If Dad had found out anything about Dominic, he'd have said something to me. I know he would. Maybe it's to do with Grandad Harry. Perhaps he's heard some rumours about what happened to him or something. Joey hugged his mum. He had always been closer to her than he had to his father, and since she'd supported him over his sexuality, he loved her more than ever. If I ask you something, Joey, will you tell me the truth? Of course. What do you want to know? I know Frankie's got a boyfriend, and I want to know why she's being so secretive about him. Joey didn't know what to say. He couldn't drop Frankie in it, so made up the first excuse he could think of. Frankie gets embarrassed, Mum. All she's told me is his name. She's never had a proper boyfriend before, so I think it's all new to her. His name's John, apparently, and I'm sure in time she'll bring him home so we can all meet him. Jessica pushed Joey's hair off his forehead. He was such a sensitive boy, and had a gift for putting her mind at rest. Where are you off to today? She asked him. I'm going shopping in Romford. It's Dom's birthday next weekend, and he's taking me to a posh restaurant to celebrate. He bought me a lovely bracelet for my birthday, Mum. I've hidden it upstairs, but I'll show you it later, Joey whispered. Jessica smiled. Her son was in love, and in her own way she was pleased for him. She would rather Joey be in love with a girl, but he was 16 now, and old enough to make his own choices in life. I wish you every happiness, Joey, I really do, Jessica whispered back. Aware of Eddie's footsteps approaching, Jessica told Joey to sit down and eat his banana. I'm going out now. Got a lot of work on today, so I don't know what time I'll be home, Eddie growled. Not able to be in the same room as his son, Eddie turned on his heel without waiting for an answer. The quicker he got out of the house, the less physically sick he would feel. Frankie woke up feeling like nothing on earth. She was meant to be going over to Kent with Jed to drop off a horse that he'd sold, but she felt too ill to do so. She rang him up to explain. I'm so sorry, Jed. I've been as sick as a pig. Do you feel okay? I think that Chinese we ate last night was a bit dodgy. Jed laughed. You see me, Frankie. Never had a day's illness in my life. I ain't even on no doctor's books. I've told you before, you don't eat enough meat. Meat makes you strong, makes you healthy, it does. Fit as a fiddle I am. How long will you be in Kent for? Can I see you when you get back? Frankie asked, changing the subject. Talking about meat was making her feel worse than ever. Well, if you ain't coming, I might have to take me other bird with me, so I might not be back till tomorrow, Jed goaded her. Knowing he was only winding her up, Frankie managed to smile. Don't muck about, you tosser. I'll be back this afternoon. I'll ring you when I'm through the tunnel. Tell your mum and dad you're staying at your mate's tonight and stay at mine. OK, Frankie said immediately. Even though things were getting awkward at home, with her mum asking all sorts of questions, she still couldn't resist spending the night with him. Waking up with Jed in the morning was the best feeling in the whole wide world. Frankie said goodbye to him and struggled onto the landing. Mum, I feel really ill. I've been sick twice. I think I've got food poisoning. Bring me up some medicine, will ya? She shouted. When the kids were younger, Jessica used to be frantic if they had any kind of illness. Since they'd got older, she didn't worry too much. She was sure that alcohol played a part in many of their little off days. They drank like fish indoors, so Christ knows what they were sinking when they were out gallivanting with friends. Fishing through the cupboards, Jessica took a box of tablets upstairs. I've got some settlers. Take 2 of them, she said, handing Frankie the box. Seeing how washed out her daughter looked, Jessica sat down on the edge of her bed. You're having too many late nights and you're drinking too much. That's your trouble. You're only 16, Frankie. Your body can't cope with being abused on a regular basis. Frankie took the tablets and then lay flat on her back. She felt like death warmed up, and a lecture from her mother was the last thing she needed. I'm staying round Stacey's tonight, but I promise I won't drink, Frankie lied. Jessica squeezed her daughter's hand. Don't fib to me, Frankie. I know you've got a boyfriend, and I know you've been spending a lot of time with him. If I've accepted Joey's relationship, what makes you think that I wouldn't accept yours? You've left school now, so you're entitled to have a boyfriend. Why don't you bring him round for tea one day so me and your dad can meet him? Overcome by anxiety, Frankie burst into tears and put her head under the quilt. Just leave me alone and go away, she yelled. Shaking her head in disbelief, Jessica said no more. She stood up and left her daughter to her tantrum. Sitting outside the pub in Islington, Eddie sipped his drink and stared at the flats across the road. For the last hour, he'd been watching every bastard that entered the building, and there was still no sign of gay boy Dominic. He had buzzed number 14 earlier, but there was no reply. He guessed Dominic was working. He was a lot older than Joey, and from what he could remember of seeing him at his house, the boy seemed intelligent and well-dressed. Eddie sighed. If Frankie had brought Dominic home, he would have been reasonably happy about it, but not fucking Joey. Thinking back to when his son was young, Eddie knew that the signs had always been there. He'd wanted to stick his oar in years ago and toughen the kid up. But frightened Jessica would leave him again, he'd kept his trap shut. Ed had let Jessica bring the twins up in the way she thought was right, and now he could have kicked himself. A son needed a dad to take him in hand, show him what the world was all about. Eddie had missed out on all that with Joey. He'd been out working a lot, and Jessica had cracked the whip, not him. Trouble was, she hadn't cracked it hard enough. Lost in his thoughts, Eddie almost did a double take as he saw the tall, dark-haired geezer letting himself in the security door. "Who's a pretty boy, then?" Eddie mumbled, as he walked back into the pub for a refill. Dominic had been indoors just over an hour when the buzzer sounded. He hated travelling on the underground, although sweaty people made him feel grubby, and he had just got out of the bath. Throwing on his white dressing gown, Dominic rushed to answer the door. "Hello? Who is it?" "Royal Mail, mate. I've got a delivery for you." Dominic was perplexed. He had nothing on order to his knowledge. Suddenly it came to him. Joey must have sent him an early birthday present. His boyfriend was such a sweetie sometimes. He really was. As Dominic opened the front door, the force of Eddie's fist sent him the full length of the hallway. As his dressing gown flew open, he quickly tried to cover his glory. "What do you want? Please don't hurt me," he sobbed, as he recognised Joey's father. Eddie shut the door. "You got a stereo, pretty boy?" he asked. "It's in the living room," Dominic stammered. It wasn't just his voice that was shaking. His whole body was quivering like an unset jelly. Eddie made Dominic get up and turn the stereo system on. "Find a decent radio station, like that new one, Capital Gold. Turn it up loud, then kneel on the floor," he ordered. "I don't know the frequency," Dominic whimpered. Eddie forced Dominic to lie flat on his face next to the stereo. Ed liked to whistle while he worked, and Capital Gold played all the oldies that he liked. Putting his boot on the back of Dominic's neck to stop him from moving, Eddie found what he was looking for. A Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum was playing, and as Eddie turned Dominic over, he thought how appropriate the song was. The colour of Pretty Boy's face was whiter than fucking snow. "Please, don't kill me. I promise I will never see Joey again, if that's what you want," Dominic begged, terrified. Eddie smiled. "Got any beers?" he asked. "In the fridge." "If you move, I'll kill you," Eddie told him. Bringing in a pack of 4, Eddie handed one to his son's lover. "Drink it," he said, as he sat on the sofa. As Dominic got up to sit on the armchair opposite, Eddie threw an unopened can at his head. "Get down on the floor, you cunt! I never said you could get up, did I now?" "Sorry, I'm so sorry," Dominic pleaded. as he lay on his front. Eddie sipped his lager. Trust pretty boy to only have Carlsberg. Weak person, weak lager. Turn over on your back, Eddie ordered him. Shivering, Dominic clutched his dressing gown around himself and did as he was told. He was so petrified that his voice had temporarily gone on holiday. Finishing the lager, Eddie crushed the can in his right hand and smiled as Dominic flinched. "Do you know what this song's about?" Eddie asked him. Capitol Gold was now playing the Bee Gees classic, "Gotta Get a Message to You." "No, I don't know many oldies," Dominic managed to whisper. "It's about someone who's going to die and wants to send a message to their loved ones," Eddie informed him. "Please, don't kill me. I beg you," Dominic pleaded. "I promise I'll do whatever you ask." Knowing that Dominic was telling the truth, Eddie decided to give him just one last little scare. He had no intention of killing him. After the unfortunate Terry Palmer incident, he had to let his bullets lie low for a while. Eddie didn't fancy a stretch inside. Not only that, Jess leaving him would break his heart, and she was worth more to him than Pretty Boy was. Taking the carving knife out of the inside pocket of his leather jacket, Eddie bent down. "Open your dressing gown," he demanded. Dominic's hand shook like a leaf as he tried to undo the belt but couldn't. Not one to see a man struggling, Eddie did the honours for him. "Please, no!" Dominic screamed, holding his hands over his penis and shaking his head from side to side in fright. As Eddie looked at Dominic's flaccid dick, he tried to erase his son from his mind. One thought of Joey wanking it or sucking it, he would chop the bastard thing off in a flash. As Dominic screamed in anticipation, Eddie turned the radio up a bit louder. The geezer was a typical weasel, and Eddie didn't want the neighbours knocking on the door. Lifting Dominic's cock up with the knife, Eddie held the blade to it and stared deeply into his victim's eyes. "You ring Joey tomorrow, and you tell him it's all over. I want you to let him down as kindly as possible. Just say he's too young or something. If he won't accept that, you tell him you've met someone else." I will, I promise," Dominic wept. Eddie smiled at Dominic's anguish. Unable to resist terrorising Dominic even more, Ed flopped his penis over and made the slightest of cuts on the tip. "You see that? Look, it's your blood." "I can't look. I can't. I've got a phobia of blood," Dominic whispered. "Well, I'll tell you something, shall I? If you ever set foot within 100 yards of my son again, I will hunt you down and chop that little knob of yours off for you. Then I'll pick it up with me bare hands and ram it straight down the back of your throat until you choke on it. Now do we understand one another?" "I understand. I'll tell Joey tomorrow. You have my word," Dominic sobbed. With a wry grin on his face, Eddie wiped the blood off his knife onto Dominic's dressing gown. He then turned the radio up full blast and calmly left the flat. Chapter 37. From the moment Joey received the phone call from Dominic, he was totally inconsolable. He couldn't eat or sleep, and for the next 48 hours refused to get out of his bed. By day 3, Jessica was really worried about her son. She told Eddie that Joey had the flu, but with his constant tantrums and tears, it was getting harder for her to cover for him. As luck would have it, Eddie had been at work for the last couple of days and hadn't asked too many questions. Today he was at home, and Jessica was dreading him being there. A while back, when Eddie had hit the roof over the Dominic rumours, Jessica had told her husband that Joey had a new girlfriend. Fortunately, Joey had taken her advice and brought a girl around for tea. The doubts about Joey's sexuality had ceased to exist since that day, and Jessica didn't want the worry of anything fresh coming out into the open. Having now forgiven Eddie for disappearing last Sunday, Jessica smiled as he sat down at the kitchen table next to Frankie. "Who's hungry? I've got a fresh crusty loaf and a nice bit of butcher's ham if anyone wants a sandwich," Jessica said. "I'll have ham and tomato," Frankie said immediately. "I'll have the same," Eddie said, tickling his daughter to annoy her. "Stop it, Dad! You're hurting me!" Frankie giggled. I'm not stopping till you tell me and your mother who this new boyfriend of yours is. What's the big secret? He ain't my age, is he?" As Frankie wriggled on the floor to get away from her father, Eddie kneeled on her arm so she couldn't move. "Seize!" he ordered Buster and Bruno, who tried to lick her to death. "Get off, Dad!" Frankie yelled, as the dogs slobbered all over her face. "Not until I know who this geezer is. I'm your father. I have every right to know. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't even be here," Eddie taunted her. "He's not your age, and his name's John. I met him down the Albion. Now get off me, Dad! Seriously! You're hurting my arms!" Joining in the fun, Jessica repeatedly hit Eddie with the tea towel. "Come on, enough's enough," she said, laughing. Frankie ate her sandwich in silence. Life was becoming more awkward by the day for her. "Why don't you ask your boyfriend if he wants to come round for dinner tonight, love?" Jessica inquired. Sick of being interrogated and not having a good enough answer, Frankie stood up. "Just leave me alone, the pair of you. John and I aren't even serious yet, so why'd you have to poke your noses in and try and spoil everything for me?" she yelled, running up the stairs. Eddie ran into the hallway. "Best you and that brother of yours stop going out partying all the time and look for a fucking job instead," he shouted up the stairs after her. Ed had only been mucking about with her, the miserable little cow. "Don't shout at her, Eddie. I think she's got a period or something," Jess told him. "I couldn't give a fuck what she's got. I'm not having all this for much longer, Jess. They both wanted to leave school at 16, so now they can go and get a fucking job. I was 10 years old when I started work, and I've always worked since. They're a lazy pair of bastards. All they do is doss about. They don't lift a finger in here. Going out on the piss all the time ain't going to get 'em far in life. Once they've spent their birthday money, that's it. They ain't getting no more. They expect continuous handouts, and it's as much as they can do to say thank you. Well, I'm putting my foot down from now on. Too soft we've been with 'em, and this is the fucking result of it." Aware that Ed's eyes had started to cloud over, Jessica quickly changed the subject. "I'm sure I felt the baby moving this morning, Ed. It's the first time I've really felt it. Shall we go shopping tomorrow? We can get the cotton and a few other bits." The mention of his unborn child put a smile back on Eddie's face. He put his arms around Jessica from behind and gently fondled her stomach. "How about we choose some wallpaper and stuff, and I'll make a start on changing the spare room into a nursery?" Jessica turned around and threw her arms around his neck. "Oh, Ed, that sounds wonderful." Frankie sat on the edge of her brother's bed. "You can't carry on like this, Joey. Why don't you ring Dom? Talk to him." Joey's eyes filled up with tears once again. "I've tried. He keeps putting the phone down on me. I can't understand it. We were getting on okay. Dominic always treated me well. He loved me, I know he did. And last week he even spoke about me moving into his flat sometime soon. It doesn't make sense, Frankie. He hasn't even been out to meet anyone else, yet he said he's fallen for some other bloke." "You don't reckon it's got anything to do with Dad, do you? Maybe he found out and threatened him or something." Joey shrugged. "I doubt it. Surely Dad would have gone mental at me if he knew something. Wonder if Dom's met someone at work. Maybe a new bloke's just started there or something." "Why don't you go up to where he works? Wait outside the building. You can see for yourself then. I'll even come with you, if you want." Joey and Frankie's conversation was ended by a gentle tapping on the bedroom door. "I've made you a nice ham sandwich and a cup of tea. You can't keep starving yourself, Joey. You need to eat something, love," Jessica said, walking into the room. Jessica was as surprised as anyone that her son's relationship had fallen to pieces, but in a way she was relieved. At least she didn't have to worry about Eddie finding out now. Joey refused the sandwich. "Go away, Mum. I'm not hungry," he cried. He couldn't bear to speak to anyone apart from Frankie. Eddie crept up the stairs and stopped halfway, listening to the conversation. Jessica lifted up the plate and handed it to Joey. "Please, just eat half for Mummy." "Stop treating me like a fucking child. I don't want the poxy sandwich. Go away and leave me alone. If you keep on at me, I'm going to kill myself," Joey screamed, as he knocked the plate out of her hand. Hearing the plate smash, Eddie saw red. How dare he talk to his mother like that? The queer little ponce. Opening Joey's bedroom door, Eddie picked up half the sandwich off the floor. "Eat it, you cunt!" he ordered. "Stop it, Ed!" Jessica screamed. "Leave him alone, Dad!" Frankie yelled. Overcome by a vision of Joey having a big dick in his mouth, Eddie held back his son's head and shoved the sandwich in there. "Eat it! Fucking eat it!" he yelled. As Joey began to make choking noises, Jessica pummeled Eddie with her fists. "If you hurt him, I'm leaving you!" she screamed hysterically. Frankie jumped on top of her brother to shield him from their father. "Get off him, you bully!" she shouted. "You're no son of mine! Never was and never will be!" Eddie spat as he left the room. Making sure that Joey was not hurt in any way, Jessica left him with Frankie and chased her husband down the stairs. "How dare you treat our son like that? What's got into you, Eddie? If you ever lay your hands on him again, we're finished." "What's got into me? I'll tell you what's got into me, shall I? How do you think that him sucking bloke's cocks makes me look, eh? Every time I look at him, he makes me feel sick. I'm ashamed to call him my son. You knew all about it, didn't you? You knew he was at it with that Dominic and you allowed it to continue. What type of mother does that make you, eh?" Jessica looked at Eddie in amazement. He had obviously known about Dominic all along. "It was you that ended their relationship, wasn't it? What did you do? Beat Dominic up? Threaten to kill him? Violence is all you know, isn't it, Eddie? Well, that might be part of your world, but it's not part of mine. I'm a good mother, and I love my children, whatever they are." Eddie gave a sarcastic laugh. "Yeah, and you've done a fantastic job, ain't you? We've got a daughter out on the piss all night, shagging Christ knows who, and a son who's away with the fucking fairies. Well done, Jess. What a wonderful job you did. You see, when our next baby is born, I'm taking over the parenting, and I mean that, Jess. Our next kid will be raised my way." Jessica burst into tears. "You can be such a nasty bastard at times, Eddie. You really can." Eddie picked up his keys. Usually, whenever Jessica turned on the waterworks, it tugged at his heartstrings, but not today. He was furious with her for allowing Joey to carry on seeing Dominic. Fucking furious. "I'm going down the pub. Don't wait up," he said, as he slammed the front door. Hearing their dad's car pull off the drive, Joey and Frankie both ran downstairs. They'd been earwigging and had heard every word. "Well, at least I know now why Dominic finished with me. I'm just relieved he's not in love with someone else. I'm going to meet him from work next week, tell him I know that my dad paid him a visit. Maybe we can sort things out. What do you think, Mum?" Jessica smiled sadly. Joey had caused all this fracas, yet he was only bothered about himself. Frankie was the same. In fact, she was probably even more selfish than Joey was. Perhaps Eddie was right. Maybe she was a terrible mother. I should let him bring up the next child the way that he saw right. "Are you okay, Mum?" Joey asked, aware that she was looking at him strangely. "Not really. I'm going to have a lie down." Without even glancing back at her children, Jessica tearfully left the room. Not that far away, someone else was planning to cause a spot of bother. Jimmy O'Hara was well aware that Eddie Mitchell had been creeping into one of their local pubs recently. Michael Murphy was a cousin of Patrick's, and he spent half his life propping up the bar of the Optimist. 3 days ago, on finding out his son was dating Frankie Mitchell, Jimmy had given Michael a ring. "As soon as Eddie Mitchell comes into that pub again, call me. I'll make it worth your while, Mickey boy," Jimmy told him. Jimmy was feeding his chickens when his mobile phone rang. "Jimmy, it's Michael. Eddie Mitchell has just walked in." Jimmy smiled as he dropped the food and ran towards his pickup truck. It was finally time for a bit of action. Eddie munched on a packet of dry roasted peanuts and gulped back his pint. As his phone rang, he answered it and was surprised to hear Jessica on the other end. "What's up?" he asked abruptly. "Oh, Ed, I'm sorry. I'm having a lie down and I've been thinking about what you said. I have been too easy on the twins. I know I have. I'm going to toughen up, you know. What you said this morning about them getting a job makes sense. They have too much time on their hands, and I think a bit of responsibility would do them the world of good." Eddie smirked. He just loved being proved right. No more hiding things from me about Joey, Jess. He either starts dating girls or he stays fucking celibate. I'm not having him make a fool out of me again. I'll disown him next time and sling him out the house. I swear on my life I will. Please don't say things like that, Ed. Things are awkward for Joey, and I still think you were out of order earlier. You nearly choked the poor little sod. He's probably just going through a phase. I'm sure he'll grow out of it. Well, if he don't, he'll be moving to the fucking Hebrides or somewhere, Eddie said angrily. All right, Eddie. Can I get you a drink, mush? Telling Jessica they would talk later, Eddie ended the call and stared at Jimmy O'Hara's ugly face. No. I'm all right, thanks, Eddie replied. As O'Hara walked to the bar, Eddie cursed himself for drinking locally. This is all I fucking need, he muttered. He couldn't just get up and walk out. He would make himself look like a right mug. Letting the pikey bastard know that he bothered him was the last thing Eddie wanted. So, how's business? Jimmy asked, as he sat down opposite Eddie. Yeah, going well. What about you? Jimmy smiled. Good. I don't do so much myself now. I'm happy pottering about at home, doing a bit of buying and selling. How's your wife? Eddie asked politely. My Alice is fine. She's a good woman, she is. What about your Jess? Pregnant, Eddie said smugly. Well, I'll be blowed. So is my Alice, Jimmy told him, smirking back. About to make his excuses and leave, Eddie was shocked to see the barman bring over a bottle of champagne and plonk it on the table. I never ordered this, Ed said immediately. I did. Without families getting it together, I thought me and you should have a little celebration, Jimmy said, grinning. Eddie looked at him in bewilderment. Surely Ronnie and Paulie hadn't joined forces with the O'Haras. If they had, it would be the worst mistake they'd ever made. He would be straight up the flag and would kill the pair of them with his bare hands. What you talking about? Eddie asked. Don't you know? Jimmy asked, chuckling. Eddie was getting annoyed now. He hated being in the dark about anything, least of all with Jimmy O'Hara. With his expression getting darker by the second, Eddie felt his bottom lip curl up. No fucking what? Jimmy was loving every minute of it. Mitchell was already losing his rag and he didn't even know the full story yet, the mug. Jimmy smiled. You're Frankie and my Jed. Well loved up they are. Your daughter's always staying on my land in his trailer. Probably at it like rabbits as we speak. You know what these kids are like. Unable to stop himself, Eddie leapt up and grabbed O'Hara by the throat. Don't lie! This ain't fucking funny, Jimmy. Whatever problems we've had in the past, it's nothing to do with my daughter. Michael Murphy walked over. Are you okay, Jimmy? What's the problem? Jimmy knocked Eddie's hand away and poured 2 glasses of champagne. He hated the stuff, but had bought it out of devilment. Sipping the shit, Jimmy smiled. On my Alice's life, I'm not joking. My Jed and your Frankie are inseparable. They was even out 5 o'clock the other morning, riding up and down on the horse and cart. Let's not argue, Eddie. I mean, they'll probably end up getting married, so we have to try to get along for their sake. Eddie picked up his glass of champagne and threw the contents into Jimmy O'Hara's unsightly face. Over my dead fucking body, he spat, as he stormed out of the pub. Approaching his Land Cruiser, Eddie took his frustration out on the driver's side door. I'll kill the little pikey cunt! I'll fucking kill him! Ed yelled, as he repeatedly kicked the metal as hard as he could. Aware of Jimmy watching him out of the window, Eddie jumped in his motor and zoomed off. Eddie was absolutely livid. O'Hara had almost creamed himself while telling him the story. Loved it, the arsehole lad. And Eddie sensed that it was probably true. It all made sense. The secrecy, the lies, and an invisible boyfriend with a fucking pseudonym. As he drove for miles, Eddie felt like he had taken a dozen punches from a heavyweight boxer. He had no idea where he was going. The thought hadn't entered his head. Spotting a pub, Eddie swung into the car park. He had to catch Frankie red-handed before he could do anything about it. But there was no point in him following her. She was too cute, and he couldn't risk alerting her that he knew. Making up his mind, Eddie took the business card out of his pocket and punched the number into his phone. Gina, it's John Smith. I've got another job for you, but I need you to do it first thing tomorrow. I can't do it tomorrow, Mr. Smith. I have another assignment I'm working on, but I can probably do it on Wednesday for you. Eddie hated people saying no to him. When he wanted something done, he wanted it immediately. Look, this is urgent. I'll give you £1,000 a day, for however long it takes. The house you followed the boy from, I need you to follow his sister. Unable to resist the money, or the handsome Mr. Smith, Gina succumbed to his persuasion. OK, I'll do it. Chapter 38. Unable now to stand the sight of either of his kids, Eddie rang Jessica to check whether they were at home or not. They've gone out, and both of them said they won't be back till late. Why are you asking, Eddie? What's wrong? Jessica could tell by the sound of his voice that something terrible had happened. As Eddie walked into the house, Jessica noticed the look of despair etched across his face. Get me a drink, and pour yourself one too. Trust me, you're going to need it, Ed told her. Jessica poured Eddie a large brandy, and herself a white wine spritzer. She'd never been a fan of drinking alcohol while pregnant, but she told herself that one wouldn't hurt. Eddie downed his drink in seconds, and immediately got up and poured another. He turned to Jessica, his face contorted with pain. I've just found out why our daughter has been so secretive about this boyfriend of hers. Talk about fraternising with the enemy. Guess who she's dating, Jess? Go on. Fucking guess. Worried, Jessica shrugged. Frankie told her very little, and she didn't have a clue. I don't know, love. Honest, I don't. Who is it? Walking towards the fireplace, Eddie picked up Frankie's latest photograph and smashed it against the wall. Jed O'Hara. Our wonderful fucking daughter's been staying on Jimmy's land while shagging his pikey cunt of a son. I'm not having it, Jess. I won't fucking allow it. And tomorrow, when I have the proof in my hands, I will fucking do something about it. A couple of miles down the road, Joey had cheered up immensely since finding out that Dominic had only binned him because of his father's interference. So, what do you reckon, Frankie? Shall I wait outside Dom's office tomorrow? Or should I give him a few more days to calm down? What would you do if you were me? Not hearing a word her brother was saying, Frankie stared vacantly out of the pub window. Frankie, whatever's the matter with you today? You're staring into thin air like a tit in a trance. I'm sorry, Joey. I was miles away. What were you saying? Knowing his sister better than she knew herself, Joey moved next to her and put a comforting arm around her shoulder. What's up? I know you're not yourself. Have you had a row with Jed? Frankie shook her head. No, it's not that. Well, what is it then? You know we can tell one another anything. Without warning, Frankie burst into tears. Oh, Joey, I'm in a right mess. Please don't tell anyone, but I think I might be pregnant. Joey looked at his sister in astonishment. For fuck's sake, Frankie. Please tell me you're joking. I'm not joking. My period's late. And after we were chatting in your room this morning, I was sick twice. Joey held her in his arms. Frankie had always been there for him throughout his dramas, and now she needed him to do the same for her. Shh. Stop crying. We'll sort this, Frankie, I promise. How? I can't tell Mum and Dad. They'll kill me, Frankie wailed. Joey wiped her eyes with his cuff. You stay in here. Get us another drink and I'll walk down the road and find a chemist. I take it you haven't done a test yet? Frankie shook her head. It was only when I was sick earlier that I thought about it. I checked my diary and my period is over 3 weeks late. I'm so frightened, Joey. I can't tell Jed. Say he says he don't want a baby. He might finish with me or something, and I can't lose him. I love him too much. Joey soothed her until she finally stopped crying. Don't cry, Frankie. You're probably worrying over nothing, and it's just coincidence. I mean, you're not stupid. You and Jed have been using something, haven't you? Embarrassed, Frankie averted her eyes and stared at her lap. Not all the time. Jed didn't like using the rubbers. He said they made his Corey itch, she mumbled. Annoyed by his sister's naivety, Joey stood up. The quicker he went and got this bloody test, the better. I'll tell you something, Frankie. Jed will have more than an itchy Corey to worry about if the test's positive. Can you imagine Dad finding out that him and Jimmy O'Hara are about to become family? There'll be murders, Frankie, fucking murders. And I hope for your sake it's a false alarm. I really do. As Eddie knocked back drink after drink, Jessica vacked up the broken glass. The photograph of Frankie was ruined, and she had slung it in the bin. I know this is hard for you, Eddie, but you won't find your answers in the bottom of a glass. Who told you all this anyway? It wasn't Ronnie again, was it? No, it wasn't fucking Ronnie. I haven't heard from him or Paulie since that day in the Flag when I found out our son likes taking it up the arse. What have we done so wrong, Jess? Tell me. We've got 2 kids, one gay and the other screwing pikeys. They've had a privileged upbringing, and this is how they repay us. Well, not anymore, Jess. I'm putting my fucking foot down from now on. And if they don't do as I say, I want a pair of them out this house immediately. Jessica didn't know what to do for the best. There was no reasoning with Eddie when he was in this kind of mood, and she was afraid what he might do when the kids came home. So, who told you then? She asked solemnly. Jimmy fucking O'Hara. I got it straight from the horse's mouth. I'll kill that boy of his, on our baby's life, if he's touched our Frankie. I'll fucking kill him, Jess. Frightened by Ed's demeanour, Jessica tried to hug him, but he pushed her away. Please don't talk like that, Eddie. You're scaring me. I'll have a chat with Frankie when she gets home. For all we know, it might not even be true. Eddie stood up and snatched at his keys that were on the table. Frankie needs a good hiding. Not one of your little chats. All this is your fault, Jess. You've been so fucking lenient with them. They've ended up with no morals whatsoever. I'm off out and don't expect me home tonight. I'm sick of the sight of this house, and I'm sick of the sight of everyone that lives in it. As Eddie slammed the front door, Jessica and the glass both shuddered. Frankie did the pregnancy test in the pub toilets. Too nervous to get the result for herself, she came out and thrust the stick into Joey's hands. Oh, it's all wet. It ain't got your piss on it, has it? Joey whinged. Stop being such a fucking pussy. It only takes 5 minutes. You check the result for me. I can't do it. I'd do it for you. The twins sat in silence. The 5 minutes seemed more like an hour to both of them. Frankie glanced at her watch. Go on then. Check it now. What exactly have I got to look for? Joey asked. If there's a blue line, I'm pregnant. And if it's clear, then I ain't. As Joey studied the stick, Frankie shut her eyes and said a silent prayer. Her brother's voice interrupted her, before she even had time to finish her conversation with God. Fucking hell. It's got a blue line. You're pregnant, Frankie. You're pregnant. Jessica sipped a cup of tea and weighed up all her options. She could stay at her mum and dad's house, but she didn't want to involve them in this. Her mum always gave unwanted advice, and Jessica knew deep down that her dad had never really taken to Eddie. Another option was to stay around Vicky's, but again, Jess didn't want to involve her and Doug either. The problems with the twins were bad enough, without the whole world finding out about them. Finishing her cuppa, Jessica chose option number 3. She would ring Raymond and ask him to stay round at hers. Jessica trusted her brother more than anyone, and if he came over, at least she wouldn't be alone in the house. Raymond was having a meal with Polly and her parents when his phone rang. He excused himself and took the call outside. What's up, sis? Oh, Raymond. Please, can you come round? Something bad's happened, and I don't know what to do. Raymond sighed. He'd had to shoot away often recently, and he didn't want Polly getting sick of his lifestyle and dumping him. I'm a bit busy at the moment, Jess. Can't I come round tomorrow? Jessica started to cry. I don't know how to handle this alone, Raymond. Eddie's found out that Frankie's been seeing Jimmy O'Hara's son and he's gone off his head. I'm frightened to stay here on my own in case Ed comes back drunk and starts trouble. Raymond knew only too well that anything to do with Jimmy O'Hara was enough to tip Eddie over the edge. "Stay calm, sis. I'll be round within the hour," he told her. Ignoring her brother's advice not to tell Jed about the baby, Frankie rang her boyfriend and told him to meet her at the pub. Finding out the test was positive had prompted her to be straight with him. She loved him, and just hoped Jed loved her as much as he said he did. "Just get rid of it, Frankie. We've still got some of our birthday money left. I'll help you pay for an abortion. Mum and Dad would never have to know," Joey begged her. Frankie shook her head. "No, it's not fair, Joey. This is as much Jed's baby as it is mine. I can't get rid of it without telling him. I love him, and I couldn't do that to him. For all I know and you know, he might want me to keep it." About to plead with Frankie once again, Joey saw Jed walk in and quickly shut up. As her boyfriend walked towards her, Frankie felt her whole body shake from head to toe. She couldn't tell him here. The pub had been almost empty earlier, but now was quite busy. Jed was more perceptive than most boys his age, and he immediately clocked the twins' serious demeanour. "Blimey, what's up with yous two? Look like you've seen a ghost, the pair of yous do," he said, smiling. Telling Joey to stay put, Frankie dragged Jed outside. "Can we talk in the motor? Where you parked?" she asked him. Jed led her to his new pickup truck and opened the door for her. "D'you like it? $4 I give for this. Bought it yesterday, I did, off some old grunter." Barely noticing the black metal monster on wheels, Frankie nodded dumbly. Lifting her chin up, Jed was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "What's the matter? Not dumping me, are you?" Frankie shook her head. She'd never felt so nervous in her life, and Joey looking out of the pub window wasn't helping matters. "Jed, I'm pregnant," she whispered. Jed burst out laughing. "Is that why you're crying, you dinlo?" "I'm scared, Jed. We're so young. What are we going to do?" Frankie asked, crying even more. Jed took her into his arms and kissed her tears away. "Look at me, Frankie," he ordered her. Frankie did as he asked, and was surprised to see him grinning. "It's not funny. You're acting as though you want the baby." Jed chuckled. "Of course I want the baby. I love you, Frankie, and we'll get married if you want." "Married?" Frankie exclaimed excitedly. Jumping out of his seat, Jed ran around the other side of the truck and dragged Frankie out. He sat her on the tail of the truck and got down on one knee. "There's people watching now, so don't make me look a Corey. Marry me, Frankie. I love you." Young, naive, and hopelessly in love, Frankie said an immediate yes, without thinking about the consequences. As Jessica finished explaining the full story, Raymond sat silently sipping his beer. He knew more than anyone how much Eddie hated Jimmy O'Hara, and he couldn't believe, if true, how Frankie could have been so bloody stupid. "He swore on our baby's life that if it was true, he'd kill this Jed. Oh, what am I going to do, Ray?" Jessica sobbed. Hugging his sister, Raymond was more worried about his brother-in-law. Eddie was the most hot-headed person he'd ever come across, and he dreaded what he was capable of doing to the O'Haras. The problem was, they were no mugs themselves, and if another feud broke out between the two families, everybody's lives, including his own, would be in danger. "Let me have a drive around. See if I can find him, Jess. I tried to ring him on the way here, but his phone was switched off." Jessica grabbed hold of her brother's hand for dear life. "Please don't leave me here alone, Raymond. The twins will probably be back soon, and if Ed comes back and you're not here, I'm frightened of what he'll do. He could be anywhere. He said he wasn't coming home tonight, so you won't know where to find him anyway." Seeing how shaken up Jessica was, Raymond agreed to stay. None of this shit could be doing her pregnancy any good, and he was worried, if he left, and Eddie came home and created a scene, she might have a miscarriage. Unaware of what was happening at home, Joey looked at his sister in total and utter disbelief. "You can't get married. You're only 16. Frankie smiled at Jed as he came back from the bar with a bottle of champagne and 3 glasses. "Here you go. Get this down your neck," Jed said, as he handed a glass to Joey. Joey had always been frightened of his sister's lover, so he chose his words very carefully. I'm sorry, Jed. I've nothing against you, mate, but my parents are going to go mental. It's bad enough Frankie's pregnant, but marriage? There's no way my dad's going to let that happen. Jed didn't seem worried in the slightest as he threw a loving arm around his wife-to-be. It's got fuck all to do with your dad. If he don't like it, it's tough shit. Me and your sister want to be together and that's all that matters, Jed said, smiling at him. But if you say you're getting married, Frankie, Mum and Dad will chuck you out, Joey pleaded. He was desperate to make her see sense. Look, Joey, as much as I love you, I think I'm going to have to move out anyway. Jed said I can live in his trailer with him on his dad's land until he buys us somewhere of our own, Frankie told him. Seeing her brother's eyes well up, Frankie squeezed his hand. Don't get upset, Joey. I'll only be 5 minutes away, and you can come over whenever you want. Course you can, Jed chipped in. Frankie's brother wasn't his cup of tea. It was obvious the mush was as queer as an iron bob note, but if Joey visiting made Frankie happy, then it was okay by him. The thought of life indoors without Frankie was unbearable for Joey. When are you thinking of moving out? He asked. Frankie was adamant as she answered. I'm going to go home in the morning and tell Mum and Dad everything. If it all kicks off, which it's bound to, then I'm going straight away. I'm sorry, Joey, but this is my life, and if Mum and Dad can't accept Jed or the baby, then I'm leaving tomorrow, for good. Chapter 39. The following morning, Eddie woke up with a sore head, stiff neck, and a mouth like a camel's arse. He'd spent the night at his salvage yard, and had slept on the uncomfortable leather chair. Annoyed with himself for getting so drunk, he walked over to the sink, cupped some water in his hands and washed his face. He'd had the day from hell yesterday, but was now feeling guilty for taking it out on Jessica. Spotting his car keys lying on the floor, Eddie turned the cabin upside down, searching for his mobile. Gina would be ringing at some point today, and he needed to find the bastard thing. With no joy, he ran out to his motor, and was relieved to see it lying on the passenger seat. He tried to switch it on, but the bloody thing was dead. You stupid fucking cunt, he said, cursing himself. Still in a complete daze, Eddie nearly forgot to lock the porter cabin up, but remembered just in time. He needed to get home, to sort things out with Jessica. Maybe Jimmy O'Hara had been winding him up, although he doubted it very much. Too cocksure of himself O'Hara was, to be lying. Eddie started the motor and glanced at his watch. Today would probably drag on forever, but at least by nightfall, he should know the truth. Jessica had lain awake all night, and had got up at the crack of dawn. Neither Eddie nor Frankie had come home last night, and she was worried sick about both of them. Not knowing what to do with herself, Jessica made Raymond a fry-up, then busied herself with the housework. In times of need, she always turned to her chores to help her. She found them therapeutic. At 7 a.m, Jessica could stand the suspense no longer and gently tapped on Joey's bedroom door. Her son had arrived home late last night and informed her that Frankie was staying at a friend's house. Jess had tried to question him, begged him to talk to her, but Joey had burst into tears, then locked himself in his bedroom and refused to come back out. Joey, it's Mum. I desperately need to talk to you, love. It's not about you, it's about Frankie. She could be in a lot of trouble and I need your help to stop anything silly from happening. Joey got out of bed and unlocked his bedroom door. He was furious with Frankie for what she had done and was planning to do. He was also annoyed with her for leaving him in the shit to deal with the aftermath of her stupidity. Noticing her son was all puffy-eyed, Jessica tenderly rubbed his arm. Are you still upset over Dominic? She asked kindly. Joey said nothing as he flopped back on his bed. Every time Dominic's name was mentioned, it felt as if a dagger was being jabbed through his heart. He missed him, dreadfully. And with all that had happened with Frankie, he needed to see him and be comforted by him, not talk about him. Jessica cleared her throat. I know about Frankie and Jimmy O'Hara's son. Your dad knows as well. And as you can imagine, he's none too pleased. For your sister's sake, Joey, I need to know everything. Is it serious? Does she see him much? Are they sleeping together? Tell me all you can, Joey. It's important that you do. Joey looked away from her. It was Frankie's job to tell their mum, not his. She's coming back this morning, Mum. You can ask her for yourself. So it is true, then. Jimmy O'Hara told your dad yesterday, and I wasn't sure if he was winding him up. What's his name, Joey? Jessica asked softly. She had to bluff to get the truth out of him. His name's Jed. You should remember him, Mum. He's the one that Dad stuck me in the boxing ring with when I was little. Now, if you don't mind, I'm busy. I have to go somewhere myself. Anything else you need to know, Frankie will tell you. This is none of my business. Jessica sat with her mouth open. She hadn't realised Jed was that terror of a child who had knocked her son out cold. Are you going anywhere nice? She asked. She couldn't think straight. This was all too much for her. Nowhere special. Please, Mum, just leave me alone. I need to have a shower and get out of this house. With the weight of the world on her shoulders, Jessica closed Joey's bedroom door and went downstairs. Aware that his sister looked upset, Raymond hugged her. Shall I see if I can find Eddie? He asked her. About to answer, Jessica ran to the window as she heard a car pulling up outside. Speak of the devil, eh, sis? Raymond joked, as he went outside to speak to his brother-in-law. Is everything okay? Raymond asked him. Not really, but I'll know for definite later. Did you stay with Jess last night? Eddie inquired. Raymond nodded. She was a bit upset and rang me. Listen, Ed, I know the score. Jess told me about Frankie and O'Hara's boy. If anything kicks off and you need backup, I'm there for you. You know that. Eddie put his arm around Raymond's shoulders. Cheers, mate. Much appreciated. Raymond laughed as Eddie lifted a massive bouquet out of his boot. Fucking hell. They ain't for me, are they? Get over yourself, you fucking tosser. Listen, Ray. Can you do me a big favour? I've got a gut feeling today's going to be a bad day. I've got a bit of running around to do. But do you think you can stay here? I don't want to leave Jess and the kids on their own. Raymond immediately agreed. Frankie ain't here though, Ed. She never came home last night. Eddie felt his pulse start to quicken. If I find out she's in that Pikey's fucking caravan, I'll kill him, then kill her, he told Raymond. Aware that Eddie's eyes had turned cloudy and angry, Raymond led Eddie back to the house. Just calm down and go and see Jess. You going off your head ain't going to do her pregnancy any good, is it? Eddie handed Raymond his phone, and he told him to put it on charge and make himself scarce for 5 minutes. Jessica was in the front room, and didn't look up as her husband walked in. Jess, I'm so sorry for having a go at you. None of this is your fault. I know it's not. You know the old saying. You always hurt the ones you love. Well, I don't mean to. But I suppose because we're so close, I'd take my frustrations out on you. Jessica had never been one to carry on an argument. She'd only ever done that once with Eddie, when he'd shoved Joey into that boxing ring, and she'd gone back to her mother's for a few days. As Eddie knelt in front of her, Jessica smiled. Look, I'm on me fucking hands and knees, begging your forgiveness. Don't tell anyone, will you? Got me reputation to think of, ain't I? Jessica looked at the beautiful flowers and hugged Eddie as he sat down next to her. I've been so worried about you. I thought you'd gone round the O'Haras and done something stupid. Please don't drink that scotch any more. I can smell it on your breath, she pleaded, burying her head in his neck. Eddie stroked her long blonde hair. I'm sorry, babe, and I swear I won't touch another drop of scotch. Raymond said Frankie never came home last night. Do you know where she was? Joey came back and said she stayed at a friend's house. She was probably round Stacey's, Jessica answered, trying to smooth the situation over. Listen, Jess, I promise you that whatever Frankie's up to, I'll try and deal with it in the nicest way I can. But if that don't work, then I'm going to have to go one step further. Do you understand what I'm saying? Jessica clung to her husband for dear life. Yes, Eddie, I understand, she whispered. Not too many miles away in Upney, Stanley was in a deep sleep, and totally oblivious of his wife prodding and poking him. Annoyed that he was glued to that stinking armchair of his and snoring like a pot-bellied pig, Joyce bent down so that her mouth was only an inch away from his ear. "Stanley!" she screamed, as loudly as she could. Stanley shot up in such shock that he lost his balance and fell head first out of the chair. "You stupid bloody woman! What'd you do that for?" he grumbled, as he rubbed his right elbow. Joyce couldn't help but giggle. Stanley looked so funny lying on the carpet in a heap. "I want you to get yourself ready, Stanley. We need to drive over to our Jessica's. Something's not right. She's got problems. I know she has. Our Raymond was over there last night and Jess barely spoke to me on the phone this morning." "Probably something to do with that dodgy old man of hers. Ain't got himself nicked, has he?" Stanley muttered, standing up. "Now don't start all that. We've no idea what's wrong yet. I know my Jess, and she sounded to me like she'd been crying. For all we know, Stanley, it could be something to do with the baby," Joyce told him. "Shouldn't we ask if it's okay for us to visit? We can't just turn up," Stanley said. Fortunately, he wasn't as nosy as his wife. "No, because Jess'll say no, and then we'll never find out what was wrong in the first place. Now go and get changed, quick as you like," Joyce said. "I'm all right. I'll go like this," Stanley said miserably. "No, you bloody well won't. Them trousers have got pigeon shit all over 'em. Go upstairs and put your nice grey ones on." Stanley tutted, but knew better than to argue. "What am I meant to say to Jock? I'm meant to be meeting him at 11 to fly our pigeons," he moaned. Joyce shook her head furiously. "You and Jock can get your cocks out any day. Now chop chop, Stanley. I'm not one to be kept waiting, you know that." "Wicked old witch," Stanley spouted, as he stomped up the stairs. Back in Raynham, Frankie's heart was beating 19 to the dozen as she crouched down behind the big bush in her next-door neighbour's front garden. "Move over a bit, Jed. Your legs are sticking out. Someone will see you," she told her boyfriend. Jed shook his head in disbelief. He loved his woman very much, but sometimes she had the brains of a rocking horse. "I'm telling you, Frankie, this is a stupid idea. Does it matter if your dad's there? He's going to find out when your mum tells him anyway. We should have done things my way instead of sitting here like a pair of dinlows." Frankie said nothing. Jed had wanted to drive over to her parents, face them, and tell them the news together, then load all her belongings onto his truck. Petrified of the fracas that was bound to happen, Frankie put her foot down. She had no doubt whatsoever that her dad would barricade her in the house, then smash both Jed and his new pickup truck to smithereens. Hearing the sound of an engine starting up, Frankie peered through the bushes, just in time to see her dad's Land Cruiser pull off the drive. "Right, me dad's gone out. The only people in the house are me mum and possibly me Uncle Raymond. His car's on the drive, and I don't think he was with me dad," she told Jed. She knew Joey was out, as she'd seen him jump into a cab about half an hour ago. "Please let me come with you, Frankie. We're getting married. Your mother's going to think I'm a right div if I don't face her like a man," Jed pleaded, as Frankie stood up. Frankie shook her head. "You don't want to come in while me Uncle Raymond's there. He's me father's henchman, so he's bound to kick off. I promise you, once the initial shock's worn off, you can meet me mum. Today, though, I need to talk to her alone." Watching Frankie walk away, Jed made a decision. He didn't like the sound of Uncle fucking Raymond, and if Frankie weren't back in half an hour, he was going in there, whether his girlfriend liked it or not. As Frankie walked up the drive, her mind was a whirlwind of emotion. She felt guilty at letting her parents down, but her love for Jed was far too strong for her to put her parents first. Frankie let herself in with the key. "There you are! Where have you been?" her mum asked, obviously relieved to see her. "Mum, I need to talk to you," Frankie mumbled. "You okay?" Raymond asked, poking his head into the hallway. Frankie nodded. "Fine, thanks. I just need to talk to Mum in private." Knowing when he wasn't wanted, Raymond retreated back into the lounge. "Come on, we'll sit in the kitchen. I'll shut the door," Jessica said. She knew by Frankie's face that whatever she had to say was very serious, and she was dreading hearing it. Not usually one to eavesdrop, Raymond knew he had little choice. Eddie would want to know what was going on, and for all their sakes he had to find out. Taking his shoes off, Raymond crept into the hallway and placed his ear against the door. "What is it, love?" Jessica asked, as Frankie began to cry. "You know that boy I've been seeing? Well, I didn't bring him home because he's Dad's Jimmy O'Hara. His name's Jed, Mum, and he makes me so happy." "Don't cry. I sort of already knew," Jessica said, cuddling her. "There's more, Mum, and you're not going to like the rest." "Go on," Jessica said, her heart in her mouth. "I'm pregnant and we're getting married," Frankie stated. Blurting it out was the only way she could say it. Feeling her legs turn to jelly, Jessica grabbed one of the wooden chairs and slumped down on it. "Oh, my God. You can't be, Frankie. You're only a baby yourself." Frankie fiercely wiped her tears away. She needed to stand up for herself, be strong, not weak. "I'm not a baby, Mum. I'm 16 and I know my own mind. Dad's going to hate me, I know he is. That's why I'm leaving home today." Unable to stop himself, Raymond burst into the kitchen. "You're going nowhere, Frankie. Your dad'll be home soon and he'll sort this mess out." Frankie stood up, her eyes blazing. "You can't tell me what to do. I'm 16 and I can legally leave home if I want to." She turned to her mother. "Let's not forget, Mum, you're only 1 year older than me when you got pregnant with me and Joey. You married Dad and had us, didn't you? Why should things be different for me? I love Jed, and I will always love him." Raymond glared at his niece. Without knowing it, the stupid, brainless girl had just revived the feud that he and everybody else had been dreading. "I'll tell you why things are different for you, Frankie. Because you're with Jimmy O'Hara's son, you idiot. This is going to break your dad's heart and cause so much fucking trouble. Don't you realise what you've done? Are you that fucking stupid?" Raymond yelled. "Please stop arguing," Jessica sobbed. Having changed lookout positions, Jed was now in Frankie's back garden and could hear almost every word. "Who do you think you are? Go fuck your grandmother, you cheeky cunt!" Jed shouted, flinging open the back door. As Raymond went for her boyfriend, Frankie screamed. Jessica tried to grab hold of her brother. "Stop it, will you? Violence isn't the answer," she wailed. "Come on, Frankie. Leave your stuff here. I'll buy you more. We're going," Jed said, grabbing her hand. Raymond took hold of Frankie's other arm. "She's going nowhere, not till her dad gets home. Get upstairs, Frankie. Your boyfriend's leaving, now." Frankie was hysterical as her uncle got Jed into a headlock and marched him out of the front door. As Raymond slammed the door and walked back inside, he tried to stop a hysterical Frankie following Jed. "You're going nowhere, you stupid little cow," he spat at her. Jed had never been frightened of anyone in his life, and he certainly wasn't frightened of Uncle fucking Raymond. "I'm not leaving here without Frankie," he shouted, as he repeatedly booted the front door. "Lock the back door and shut all the windows," Raymond ordered his tearful sister. Like a raging bull, Jed tore a big branch off a tree and put it straight through one of the windows. "Frankie! Frankie! Don't take no notice of your wanker of an uncle! Come on, hurry up!" he yelled. Ordering Jessica to make sure her daughter stayed inside, Raymond ran out to his motor. He always carried a baseball bat for emergencies, and this was definitely one of them. "I ain't frightened of you, you fucking dinlow," Jed shouted at him. Confident that he could fight Raymond off, Jed changed his mind as soon as he spotted the baseball bat coming his way. "You go near Frankie again and I'll fucking kill you," Raymond screamed, as he chased Jed down the driveway. Streets ahead of him, Jed couldn't resist turning round and doing a wanker sign. "Shut up, you muggy cunt," he said, smirking. Incensed, Raymond carried on chasing him. Never once for perfect timing, Joyce and Stanley chose that exact moment to turn into the driveway. Joyce looked at Stanley to make sure her eyes weren't deceiving her. "Was that how Raymond's chasing someone with a baseball bat?" Stanley nodded dumbly. He was far too shocked to speak. Joyce got out of the car and did a little jog back to the entrance of the driveway. "Raymond! It's your mother! Get your ass back here! What do you think you're doing?" she screamed. With her son nowhere to be seen, a furious Joyce stomped back to the car. "Come on, Stanley, don't just sit there. We need to find out what's going on." As Stanley got out of the car, he felt nauseous. He hated trouble of any kind, and certainly didn't want to be involved in it. Jessica opened the front door. "What's going on?" Joyce asked, as her daughter fell sobbing into her arms. Frankie knew that this was probably her only opportunity to escape. Desperate to get away, she sprinted past her mum and Nan and sent her grandfather flying as he tried to walk through the front door. Losing his balance for the second time that day, Stanley landed on his arse. "Golden Bennett!" he exclaimed as he tried to get up again. Jessica could barely speak for crying. "Frankie's pregnant. Eddie's going to kill her. What am I going to do, Mum?" she said between sobs. Joyce sat Jessica on the sofa. "Now come on, dear. Stop all that crying. Everything will sort itself out," she said gently. "It won't. She's pregnant by the gypsy boy down the road, and Eddie's had a feud with that family all his life." Jessica wept. Aware of his balance letting him down once more, Stanley fell onto the sofa in utter shock. "Gypsy? What do you mean? Is that who our Raymond was chasing?" Jessica nodded. "Jed's a gypsy boy. All his family are travellers." Seeing her husband's face go deathly white, Joyce felt her own turn the same colour. "Oh, my God! I feel ill," she gushed. With his baseball bat still in his hand, Raymond ran back to the house. He had chased Jed for about a mile, but the cocky little bastard was as fast as a whippet, and he hadn't got anywhere near him. Out of breath, Raymond ran into the house and put his hands on his knees. Where's Frankie?" he asked, panting. Jessica burst into tears again. "She's gone. She's ran off and I couldn't stop her." Ignoring his parents, Raymond picked his mobile phone up off the table and ran out the back. Willing the phone he was ringing to answer, he breathed a sigh of relief when it did. "Ed, it's me. Something terrible's happened. You need to come home. Right now." Chapter 40. At 10:50, Joey left the coffee shop and crossed the busy main road. Dominic took his lunch break at 1 o'clock, and although dreadfully nervous, Joey couldn't wait to see him. Joey had travelled up by train, and while pretending to read the paper, he'd had a long, hard think about his future. Living at home without Frankie by his side really didn't appeal to Joey. He loved his mum, but his sister was the only one who really understood him. As Dominic walked through the huge glass doors, Joey's heart skipped a beat. "What are you doing here?" Dominic hissed at him. "I need to talk to you," Joey pleaded. "I've already told you. I've met someone else. Now please, just leave me alone," Dominic told him. Upset by his ex-lover's reaction, Joey followed him as he walked off in the opposite direction. "I know you're lying, Dom. I found out the truth and I know my dad came to see you. Please, let's go for a drink so I can say my piece. 10 minutes of your time, that's all I ask." Dominic had never felt so petrified in his entire life, as the night Joey's father had paid him a little visit. He still couldn't sleep, even now, and every time he closed his eyes, he could feel the tip of that knife on the base of his helmet. Deep down, Dominic still adored Joey, but he wasn't about to tell him that. He couldn't. It was too dangerous. 10 minutes. Then I want you and your thug of a father out of my life for good," he said venomously. Eddie took the phone call from Gina, which confirmed what he had already been told. "I'm still in the vicinity. I've taken loads of photographs. Do you want me to meet you now, Mr. Smith?" Guessing that Raymond's phone call had something to do with Frankie, Eddie asked Gina to do him a big favour. "Look, I don't care how much this costs. I want you to keep my friend's daughter and the bloke she's with in your sights. Anywhere they go, I want you to follow them. Can you do that for me?" Gina smiled. She would literally do anything for the gorgeous Mr. Smith. "Of course I will," she told Eddie. Desperate to get home, Eddie ended the call and pressed his foot hard against the accelerator. He'd been on his way to pick up some money off a geezer in Kent when Raymond rang him. He had immediately turned around and headed back towards Raynham. Unfortunately, it had taken him ages, as there'd been an accident at the Dartford crossing. Eddie breathed a sigh of relief as he finally pulled into his driveway. Raymond had been reluctant to talk on the phone, and all the way home Eddie had been going over what might have happened. Eddie had never been a person to be kept in the dark, and the suspense was fucking killing him. Eddie opened the front door. "Well, what's going on?" he yelled, as he saw Jessica, Joyce, Stanley and Raymond sitting in the living room with faces like ghosts. Jessica burst into tears. "You tell him, Ray. I can't do it," she sobbed. "Fucking tell me then," Eddie screamed at Raymond. "Sit down. Let me pour you a brandy," Raymond said. Eddie was getting more wound up by the second. "Fuck sitting down and fuck the brandy. Just spit it out, will ya? Frankie's pregnant. She's left home and says her and Jed O'Hara are getting married," Raymond told him. Eddie couldn't have been more shocked if an elephant had walked into the lounge. "What? Over my dead body? Who told you this?" Seeing the cold, calculating look in his son-in-law's eyes, Stanley felt his bowels loosen and made a quick exit. "Where are you going, Stanley? Why are you walking funny?" Joyce yelled at him. "I need the toilet," Stanley replied, as he did a clenched-ass shuffle down the hallway. "There's something wrong with that man," Joyce commented. Raymond glared at her. "For fuck's sake, Mother, shut up," he said, as he turned to Eddie. "Frankie told us. She came home after you went out. He was with her. That Jed. Cocky little bastard he is. I chased him off with a baseball bat. I'd have mullered him if I'd have caught him, Ed, but he ran as fast as a greyhound chasing a rabbit." Unable to stop himself, Eddie flew into one almighty rage. "I will fucking kill that scumbag pikey cunt! Come on, Ray. Me and you are going over to the house. I want my daughter home, and I want her home now." Eddie stormed into the kitchen like a bull in a china shop. "This should do the trick," he spat, as he grabbed hold of a carving knife. "Please, Eddie, don't go round there," Jessica screamed, as she got down on her hands and knees and clung to his legs. "Jess, get off me! This is our daughter we're talking about, and I need to put a stop to this shit right now. May God be my judge she ain't having that pikey cunt's kid. I'll rip it out of her with me bare hands if I have to," Eddie shouted. "You'll get arrested. Please, Raymond, do something. You're the only one you listen to," Jessica screamed. As Eddie stormed out of the house, Raymond caught up with him and grabbed him by the shoulders. "Listen to me. Jessie's right. This ain't the way to do things. For fuck's sake, use your brain. It's broad daylight. If you go round there and stab the cunt, you'll spend the rest of your life in the nick. Think about Jess. You got a baby on the way." Realising Raymond was right, Eddie threw the knife on the gravel, sank to his knees, and cried tears of pure anger. Less than half a mile away, Jed paced nervously up and down his trailer. His old man had gone away to a horse fair for the weekend, and his mother was staying at her sister's. "What's the matter, Jed?" Frankie asked, giving him a hug. "Us travellers are psychic, Frankie, and I've got a bad feeling about us staying here alone. If me dad was here, we'd be all right, but he ain't." "What are we going to do then? I need some clothes, Jed, and underwear." Jed squeezed Frankie and rocked her from side to side. "I think we should get out of here. Me dad's got a trailer in his salvage yard in Tilbury. We can stay there till he gets back from the horse fair. I'm not frightened of no one, Frankie, but we should get away and let things calm down a bit. Don't worry about clothes and stuff. I'll stop on the way there and take you shopping. Trust me, my nan sensed stuff happening, and I'm the same." Frankie smiled. Life was one big adventure with Jed, and he made her feel so safe and loved. "Are you sure everything's going to turn out all right, Jed?" she asked him. Jed tilted her chin. "I know everything's going to be okay, but I also know the quicker we get out of here, the better." As they drove out the gates, neither Jed nor Frankie noticed the woman clocking them in the little black Micra. Oblivious to what was happening to his sister, Joey was trying to iron out his own problems. Unable to stop his emotions, he hugged Dominic for what would probably be the last time, and could only watch as he walked away. As Dominic turned around and waved, Joey stood rooted to the spot for a few minutes. Devastated, he then found the nearest pub to down his sorrows. I want a triple vodka with ice and a dash of lemonade, he told the barman. Finding a quiet table, Joey flopped onto a seat. What his father had done to Dominic was despicable and unforgivable. Joey had never been that close to his dad. He'd always known, deep down, that his dad preferred Gary and Ricky. It didn't really bother him. Even when he was a child, he had sensed that his dad saw him as a disappointment, the weakest link, and he had just got on with things in his own little way. Another thing that Joey was always aware of was that his father was a villain. Frankie and he had both clocked on when they were about 10 years old and spent many a night giggling about what their school teachers might say. Although not a big fan of his father, Joey had never imagined him as a violent, nasty, vicious bully. Dominic wasn't lying. Joey knew that, and he was flabbergasted by his dad's behaviour. To force his way into Dom's flat with a knife was bad enough on its own. But then to make him lie naked on the floor while threatening to chop his penis off was the most callous act that Joey had ever heard of. You will always hold a special place in my heart, and I will always love you, Joey. But promise me, for my safety, you won't contact me again, Dominic had begged him. Finishing his drink, Joey slammed the glass on the table and stormed out of the pub. He couldn't wait to get home and tell his mum the story. She was married to an animal who had a screw loose, and she had every right to know the truth. As Joey got on the train, his thoughts turned to his sister. If his dad was capable of doing what he had done to Dom, Christ only knows what he was capable of doing to Frankie's boyfriend. Joey had no idea if Frankie had told their parents after he had left this morning, but he knew he had to warn her. He didn't particularly like Jed, but at this moment in time, he preferred him to his sadistic head case of a father. As the train stopped in a tunnel, Joey listened intently as an announcement was made. Due to signal failure, there will be a short delay. Shit, Joey muttered. He needed to get home, and fast. Jed could be in serious trouble, and he had to warn Frankie immediately. After his minor show of emotion, Eddie had now got his act together. Just in case things turned sour, he needed to get anything dodgy off the premises. Right, stick the jewellery and diamonds in that sports bag, Ray. Get that picture down from in the front room as well. That's hooky. Came out of an art gallery, I think. As his son reached above his head to take the painting off the wall, Stanley looked at his wife in horror. I always said Eddie was a crook, didn't I? He whispered. Why don't you just shut the fuck up? Joyce said, punching him in the arm. Jessica was having a lie on the bed, and Joyce was worried about her. She'd almost fainted earlier with bad stomach pains, but had begged her mum not to tell Eddie. Joyce turned to Stanley. I think him and our Raymond are going out somewhere. Do you think I should tell Eddie that Jess ain't well? She said in hushed tones. Stanley shrugged. He hated this house, hated Eddie, and couldn't wait to get home to his pigeons. As Buster and Bruno came in from the garden and leapt on him with muddy paws, Stanley stood up. Our son and son-in-law are probably just popping out to rob a bank, dear. I'm going outside to have a cigar. I'll need some fresh air, and I can be lookout for the police arriving, he said sarcastically. You are one miserable old bastard, Joyce told him as he left the room. Upstairs, Jessica was wide awake and crying on her pillow. She'd had pains and twinges all day. Unbeknown to her family, she'd rung the hospital earlier. You haven't lost any blood at all? The nurse had inquired. No, but I sort of passed out, Jessica had replied. You'll be fine. You've just been overdoing it. All you need is rest, the nurse insisted. Hearing the front door slam and an engine start up, Jessica got up and walked over to the window. Seeing her husband's Land Cruiser roar away, she ran downstairs. Mum, where's Eddie gone? Is Raymond with him? She asked, panicking. Joyce smiled and patted the seat next to her. Sit down, and I'll make you a nice cup of tea. Raymond's with Eddie. They've gone to the pub. Ed wanted to come up and tell you, but I told him not to. I thought you were asleep. Picking up the house phone, Jessica rang her husband's mobile, just to check her mother's story. I'm fine, Jess. I've calmed down now, honest. Me and Raymond are going out for a few pints. Eddie assured her. Jessica was relieved. He sounded okay.
"Promise me, Ed. You won't get on the scotch," she begged him.
"I promise. And I love you," Eddie replied. Jessica felt her body relax as she sipped the strong, sugary tea. As Joey burst into the room, Jessica knew her day was destined to end as badly as it had begun. "Mum, I need to talk to you alone," her son insisted. Jessica stood up. Joey was visibly upset, so she led him upstairs away from his grandparents. Stanley, who had followed his grandson into the house, looked at Joyce. "No wonder them kids have got problems. There's more drama going on than Dallas in this family. Our Jess should never have married Eddie. I told you that years ago, but you wouldn't listen, would you?" Joyce pursed her lips. "I should have never married you, but I did. Now just sit down and shut your bastard trap." As Joey sobbed his heart out, Jessica did her best to comfort him. "I can't understand what you're saying. What did Dad do?" "He broke into Dominic's flat, made him lie on the floor, naked, and threatened to chop his penis off and shove it down his throat. Dom won't see me no more, Mum. He's too scared. And now I'm worried about Frankie. If Dad did that to Dominic, what will he do to Jed?" Jessica felt the hairs on her body stand on end. She suddenly didn't feel as if she knew her loving husband at all. "We need to ring Frankie and warn her, Mum. Dad's capable of anything. I just know he is. Dominic told me that Dad even made a little cut on the end of his penis. Then he laughed as he wiped the blood all over his dressing gown." Jessica felt physically sick as she told Joey to search his sister's bedroom. Frankie hadn't taken her mobile with her, and they needed to find Jed's number to ring him. As Jessica felt a sharp twinge in her stomach, she lay on her bed and prayed. "Please, God, keep me and my children safe. Amen," she whispered. A few miles down the road, Eddie and Raymond were doing a bit of digging. After leaving home, they'd purchased a bottle of scotch and a bag of ice, and headed straight to Ed's salvage yard. "That's deep enough," Eddie said, handing Raymond the haul they'd dug up from his father's house. Eddie knew it was about to all go off, and he didn't want anything dodgy indoors in case the Rozzers came sniffing around. "What about the painting?" Raymond asked. "I'll deal with that. You okay for a minute? I've got to make a couple of phone calls. If you need me, I'll be in the cabin." Pouring himself a large scotch, Eddie drank it, then rang Gina's number. "Well, are they still in Raynham?" he asked. Gina smiled when she heard Eddie's voice. "No, they're in Tilbury. Earlier they went shopping, bought clothes and a sleeping bag, and now they're in an old trailer on what looks like some kind of scrapyard." "Get yourself home now. Can you get back there first thing tomorrow? I might need you to watch them all day. Money's no object. You know that." Gina was usually very professional, but couldn't resist letting her guard down for once. "I'll do it on one consideration, Mr. Smith." "What?" Eddie asked. "That you buy me dinner, as a thank you." "You've got a deal," Eddie lied. He had no intention of taking Gina anywhere. Not once had he ever even thought of cheating on Jess, and he wasn't about to start now. "We've got to go now. Get there at 6, he said, ending the call. Eddie refilled his glass and studied the guns that he and Raymond had dug up earlier. He had no idea where his father had got the machine gun from. He held it in his hand and smiled. It felt good. It felt right. And providing everything went to plan, it would spell the end of Jed O'Hara once and for all. Chapter 41. Opening her eyes, Frankie nudged Jed. They were snuggled up together in a sleeping bag, but the bed they were lying on smelt musty and damp. "Jed, I need to get up. Move over, will you? The smell of this bed's making me feel sick." Jed unzipped the bag so Frankie could climb over him. Unbeknown to her, the trailer they were staying in used to be his little shagging den. When his mum and dad split up, Jed had kept in close contact with his old man, and when he was 13, his dad had given him the key to this place. "It's got everything you need in there, boy. Any time you want to pull yourself a little gorger bird, take her back there," he told him. Within a month of being given the key, Jed was making regular use of the trailer. He'd been knocking about with his cousin, Sammy Boy, at the time, and between them they must have brought 1,000 birds back. Jed smiled. He and Sammy Boy had had some good times here. None of the birds had meant anything to them, it was all just a bit of fun. Jed had changed since he'd met Frankie. He'd never been in love before, but Frankie had cast her magic spell over him. He was content now, and other girls didn't interest him in the slightest. "Jed, what's in this little box room that's locked? Have you got the key? Can I have a look in it?" About to say yes, Jed remembered what was in there. "Shit, I got to get rid of that stuff," he mumbled. "It's a load of old rubbish in there, Frankie. It's me dad's stuff. He don't like anyone going in there," Jed lied. Frankie would have a fit if she knew what was really in there. If she ever saw those photographs, that would be the end of their relationship. Cursing himself for being so slapdash, Jed made a mental note to burn the photos as quickly as possible. He had only kept them as souvenirs, and should have got rid of them yonks ago. He got out of bed and slung on his clothes. Frankie smiled as Jed put his masculine arms around her. "What are we going to do today? Can we get something to eat? I'm starving," she asked. "I'll tell you what. Why don't we go and get a Mackie D's, and then later, when it's dark, I'll clear me dad's shit out of that spare room and we can make ourselves a nice romantic campfire to sit round." Frankie kissed him. She had not sat around a campfire since she was a kid. Her dad used to make a big thing of bonfire night when she and Joey were little. "Perfect," she said. As he shut the trailer door, Jed smiled. Later, those photos would go up in smoke, and then his beautiful girlfriend would never be any the wiser. With his brain doing overtime, Eddie got out of bed as soon as the birds began to sing. "Can't you sleep, love?" Jessica asked softly. Eddie sat on the edge of the bed and held his arms out for a hug. "Listen, I can't rest not knowing what our Frankie's up to. Today I'm going to bring her home, Jess, and I need you to do me a favour. I don't think there'll be any trouble, but I don't want you here until she's home. I want you to take Joey and stay at your parents' for a couple of days." Jessica moved from her husband's grasp. "How are you going to bring her home? You're not going to do anything silly, are you, Eddie?" "Of course not. Me and Raymond know exactly what we're doing. I swear to you, Jess, all I want is our baby home, safe and sound." Unable to stop thinking about what Joey had told her, Jessica got more involved than usual. "What about Jed? What are you planning to do to him? I know you better than you think, Eddie, and if you hurt that boy, then I'm leaving you for good." Eddie looked at Jessica in amazement. Her leaving him was never going to happen. "What the hell are you talking about? Has someone been telling tales about me, or what?" Jessica shook her head. She had promised Joey that she would never repeat what he had told her. "If you say one word, Dom will be as good as dead, Mum," Joey had begged her. "I'm just worried, Ed. No one said anything to me. But I know what you're like. When you're on that scotch, you're a different person. Just promise me that you won't hurt Jed." Eddie crouched down, took her hands in his and looked as sincere as a child. "I swear to you, all I'm going to do is buy off that boy. I want Frankie home, and him out of her life. If I pay him enough, he'll move on, and he won't come back. These pikeys are fly-by-nights, Jess. They ditch one bird, then they're with another 5 minutes later. He won't return searching for our Frankie, not if the money's good enough, I betcha." Jessica sighed. She wanted to believe Eddie, but didn't know if she could anymore. "It's not as easy as that, Eddie. What about the baby? You seem to have forgotten that Frankie's pregnant. If Frankie wants to keep the child, Jed's bound to want to see it at some point." Every time Frankie's baby was mentioned, it was a struggle for Eddie to keep his temper intact. "That pikey piece of shit probably already has about 10 kids dotted about the country. That's what they're like, all fucking inbred. None of them go to school, and the only thing they learn is to fuck one another. Pat Murphy reckons Jimmy O'Hara's wife Alice is his cousin, so that says it all. I don't know about you, Jess, but I refuse to let my daughter live in that community. Now, are you going to your mother's with Joey or what?" Ed asked angrily. Yes. I'll get up now. Wake Joey and we'll get going, Jessica said sadly. Annoyed with himself for shouting at her, Eddie held Jessica tightly. I'm sorry, babe. You know what I'm like. I'll ring you when I've sorted things. Then you can come home. Staring into his cloudy eyes, Jessica knew he had bigger plans for Jed than he had admitted. She was worried now. Really worried. The last thing she wanted to do was betray Eddie, but she knew she had to do something. Feeling terribly guilty, she pecked him on the lips. I love you, she told him. Thankful she was okay about his plans, Eddie smiled at her. And I love you too, babe. Jed laughed as Frankie polished off her second egg and bacon muffin. Sure a sign you're eating for two. You'll be as fat as a bull soon, you will. Frankie playfully punched him. When she'd first got with Jed, his warped sense of humour used to give her the hump. Now she just joined in with him. I don't care if I get big and fat. If you don't want me, Jed, there's loads of others that will. Jed grabbed Frankie's face, and not caring about the other diners watching, stuck his tongue down the back of her throat. Do you mind? That's disgusting, said a grey-haired woman sitting nearby. Jed grabbed Frankie's hand. They'd eaten all their food and were ready to leave anyway. Never able to resist a parting shot, Jed grabbed the woman's hand as he walked past her and guided it towards his penis. You're only jealous, you old grunter. You want me and me Corey for yourself, don't you? He taunted her. Management, I demand you call the police. Never in my life have I been so insulted, the woman screamed. Pissing themselves with laughter, Jed and Frankie ran from the restaurant. Eddie was sitting opposite Raymond in Rosie's cafe along the A13. Yous two are looking as handsome as ever, may I say, Rosie shouted out to them. Rosie was a plump woman in her late 50s, and Eddie always had a laugh with her. Rosie had a personality to die for, and the biggest pair of tits he had ever seen in his life. Rosie, put them knockers away, shut your trap and cook my fucking bacon, he shouted back. Turning back to Raymond, Eddie filled him in on the plan. So, what we're going to do is turn up there when darkness falls in 2 separate motors. I want you to run him with a baseball bat, and if Jed starts, clump him over the head with it. Then I need you to drag Frankie out the trailer, shove her in the car, and take her home. Raymond shook his head. That ain't gonna work. Your Frankie's like a wild fucking cat. You don't honestly think she's gonna come out gracefully and sing to the radio on the way home, do you? I've brought a load of rope with me. I know she's my daughter, but you're gonna have to tie her up. There's a gag in me boot. Stick that on her as well, Eddie told him. Raymond's face was a picture. So where do you come into all this? And what am I meant to do with her when I get her home? What's Jess going to say when I bring her daughter home looking like an escape artiste? Eddie smirked. Raymond had cottoned on to his sense of humour over the years. So much so that he could probably give Eddie a run for his money now. I've sorted everything. When you get home, Gary and Ricky will be there. I didn't really want to get him involved in this one, but I had no choice. You can leave Frankie with them. They'll take care of her. Then I want you to drive back to Tilbury to help me clear up what's left of Jed. Surely Frankie's going to realise you've killed him. She's got will of her own, that girl. Say she starts blabbing to someone. She won't. I'm going to tell her I gave Jed 10 grand to get out of her life. He put it in his pocket and ran like a racehorse, I'll tell her, Eddie said confidently. Raymond had his doubts about the story. She ain't stupid, your Frankie. You don't want to underestimate her, Ed. She'll be fine in time. Obviously she's going to be upset at first, but once I persuade her to get rid of the baby, she'll get over it. Hopefully, one day she'll meet a nice bloke, have his kids and thank me for a lucky escape. Not agreeing with Eddie's way of thinking, Raymond changed the subject. If you shoot Jed in the trailer, we're going to have to burn it. Eddie smiled. He was clever and had thought of everything. I'm going to burn the trailer, but not Jed. You know what the filth's like. They'll find his teeth and work out it's him. When you drive off with Frankie, I'm going to kill him, then wrap his body up in plastic. I've got a hooky motor to use. When you come back, we're taking the body over to Flat Nose Freddy. Freddie disposed of many bodies for me dad over the years, and our pikey friend Jed is going into his big cement mixer. Freddie, I said, the boy's a traveller. He's used to open space. Don't worry, Eddie. I'll prop him up in one of the flyovers I'm building. He's out in the open forever then, Freddie assured me. Then, Ray, we'll burn the motor. Raymond said nothing as he sipped his tea. Eddie's plan was good, but not infallible, and Raymond had a terrible feeling that something was about to go very, very wrong. A couple of miles away, Jessica paced up and down the living room. Joey had just left to stay with his grandparents. Please, Mum, I want to stay with you. What are you going to do? Please tell me, her son begged her. Jessica had waved away his fears. Mummy's not doing anything for you to worry about. All I'm going to do is ring Jed and speak to him and Frankie. If I can meet up with them, maybe between us we can sort things out, she told Joey honestly. Please let me come with you. I miss Frankie so much, her son pleaded. Knowing that Joey was an emotional wreck, and certainly no tough cookie, Jessica refused. You stay at Nan and Grandad's, and as soon as I've met up with Frankie, I promise I'll ring you and tell you everything. With Joey now safely out of the house, Jessica rang Jed's number. Joey had found it the day before. It was written on a piece of paper in Frankie's bedside cabinet. As Jed answered the phone, Jessica spoke calmly and rationally. Please don't put the phone down, Jed. It's Frankie's mum and I want to help you. We're fine. We don't need your help, Jed said coldly. Listen, Jed, and listen carefully. I need to meet up with you. Eddie's on the warpath and I'm worried about your safety. I swear he doesn't know that I'm ringing you, and if you see him, please don't tell him. Jed swerved onto a curb and, holding his phone between his legs, repeated the conversation to Frankie. Although Frankie used to be a daddy's girl, she knew that her mum was the one she could trust. Let me speak to her, she urged Ed. Reluctantly, Jed handed her the phone. Mum? What's up? Jessica repeated what she'd already told Jed. I'm really worried, Frankie. Your dad's planning something stupid. I saw it in his eyes. Well, he won't find us, Frankie said adamantly. Aren't you at Jed's house? Jessica asked, surprised. No, we're miles away. It's remote where we're staying, sort of in the middle of nowhere. Please, Frankie, tell me where you are and I'll come over and sort things out. I understand how you feel about Jed and the baby, I really do. I felt the same about your dad and you and Joey when I fell pregnant. I want you to be happy, Frankie. And if you want to marry Jed and have his baby, then it's fine by me. We still need to convince your father. But if I can come over and speak to you and Jed, between us we can make things right. Frankie held a hand over the phone and spoke to Jed. Look, I know she's not setting us up. My mum's not like that. We can't stay away forever, Jed. I miss Joey, and I'm going to want contact with him. If anyone can make my dad see sense, it's my mum. Please, Jed, give her the address and let her come over. Against his better judgment, Jed told Jessica where they were staying and told her not to drive there until it got dark. And don't come in on your own car. Borrow one off someone else, or we ain't got a deal, Jed told her, as he abruptly ended the call. Thanks, Jed, Frankie said, squeezing his hand. Jed snatched his hand away. Here, Cacker. You've done a wrong in there, Frankie, I'm telling you. I got a terrible gut feeling that tonight is going to be one almighty disaster. Things ain't going to go cushy. I just know they ain't. Chapter 42. Eddie and Raymond sat in a grotty pub in Tilbury. The weather was awful. It was meant to be midsummer, but the rain was bouncing off the ground. How did you know that Frankie and Jed were in Tilbury? Raymond asked, sipping his pint. I hired a private detective. I need you to go and pay her for me tomorrow. She's got the hots for me, so I ain't going myself. I can't, anyway. I'll be too busy indoors sorting Frankie out. I'll ring Jess tomorrow morning, get her to come home. She'll know what to do. Are you going to tell Jess the same story as you're telling Frankie? Raymond inquired. Of course. No one must ever find out the truth. I'm not even going to tell Gary or Ricky. The less anyone knows, the better with this one. Do you want another pint? Raymond asked. Nah, I'll just have an orange juice. We've got a big night ahead of us, and we need our wits about us, Ed replied. Raymond felt himself shudder. Kidnapping Frankie, murdering Jed, something didn't feel right. Even the weather seemed against them. Be careful, Ed. Something feels wrong about all this to me. Eddie laughed. You know your trouble. You worry too much, Raimondo. Jessica sat in Vicky's house drinking a strong black coffee. Her nerves had been shattered last night, which had led to her feeling faint and weak. So, is Joey at home? Vicky asked, concerned. No, me dad picked him up earlier. He didn't want to go. He wanted to stay with me. But what could I do, Vicky? It's not right, him being in the house with all this going on. Vicky gave her best friend a hug. Jessica told her everything and vice versa. They trusted one another implicitly, and what was said between them was never repeated to either of their husbands. So how exactly is Ed going to get Jed to stay out of Frankie's life? Jessica shrugged. Ed said he's going to offer Jed money to stay away. The thing is, Vicky, I think Jed and Frankie are truly in love. If Jed knocks back Eddie's offer, then I'm petrified of what might happen next. I need to sort it, but Jed said I can't take my own car. Vicky said nothing. She'd heard loads of rumours about Eddie Mitchell over the years, and knew he was ruthless and dangerous. Look, you can take my car. If anyone can sort this mess out, then it's you, Jess. And don't worry too much about Eddie. He'll be too frightened of losing you to do anything stupid. Jessica's face momentarily lit up. Do you really think so, Vicky? Vicky smiled. Of course I do. Lying was Vicky's only option. She could hardly tell her best friend that Eddie would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. What Jessica didn't know couldn't hurt her. And as a friend, it was Vicky's job to protect her from the awful truth. Back in Tilbury, the bonfire was burning brightly. Do us a favour, Frankie. Most of this wood's wet. Go and see if you can find some dry bits, Jed told her. Frankie stared at the fire. It's burning okay. Do I have to, Jed? It gave Frankie the heebies where they were staying, and she didn't fancy walking around in the dark on her own. No one's going to abduct you, you dinlow. The only reason the fire's burning is 'cause I cleared some of me dad's old toot out of that room. I've got nothing left to burn now. As Frankie walked off, Jed ran into the trailer, grabbed the incriminating photographs and threw them onto the fire. Burn, you bastards, he mumbled, prodding them with a stick. By the time Frankie ran back, the evidence was in ashes. All right. Where's the wood? Jed asked her. Frankie fell into his arms. I saw a rat and I hate them. It was staring at me, Jed. Jed held her tightly. I can't stand 'em either. Long-tails, I call 'em. Evil little bastards they are. You don't think there's any watching us now? Frankie asked him. Look, there's one there, Jed yelled, making Frankie jump out of her skin. Jed laughed. Come on. Let's go inside and have something to eat. You can tidy up a bit before your mum gets here. 2 miles down the road, Eddie could feel his adrenaline levels rising. This orange juice is making me feel queasy. Get us a large scotch, Raimondo. Get yourself one and all. As Raymond went up to the bar, Eddie gave Gina a call. Well, are they still there? Yes. They've lit a fire outside. So I think they're settled for the night. You can pull off now. My colleague will settle up with you tomorrow. I know we agreed on a price, but I've stuck a few £100 in extra for all your hard work. Thank you, Mr. Smith. That's very kind of you. But I would rather be taken out for dinner, Gina said boldly. I'm very busy at the moment, but as soon as I get a bit of free time, I'll call you, Eddie lied. He had to keep her sweet, as he didn't want her blabbing. And Gina, not a word to anyone. My friend's a very violent man, and if any of this got out, it would make him very angry, Eddie said threateningly. I understand, Gina replied. Well, I've got to go now. It's been a pleasure doing business with you, Eddie said, before ending the call. Raymond handed Eddie his drink. Who was that on the blower? The private detective. I've just sent her home. It's getting dark now, so I suggest we have a couple more drinks, then make our move. Oblivious of what was about to happen, Jed and Frankie were munching crisps and discussing baby names. "What do you think of Chantel for a girl?" Frankie asked. Jed turned his nose up. "Don't like it. Sounds like a fucking porn star." "Well, you think of some then. You ain't liked any of mine so far," Frankie said sulkily. Jed pushed her onto the bench settee. "Get in the ump, are we?" he said, tickling her. As he kissed her passionately, Frankie immediately responded. "I really do love you," she told him, as he pulled away. Jed smiled. He needed to butter her up to ask his next question. "Frankie, if we have a boy, can we call him Butch, after me granddad? I know you never met him, but he was a good old mush, and I was always close to him." Frankie paused before answering. She didn't particularly like the name, but it obviously meant a lot to Jed. "I don't see why not. But let's decide for definite nearer the time," she said, smiling. Jed grinned as he cuddled her. Baby Butch would be the most idolised kid in the travelling community. His grandfather had been a legend amongst their own, and by giving his son the same title, the name Butch O'Hara would carry on for years to come. Frankie stood up and peered out of the window. "I'm sure I just saw headlights. Go outside and have a look, Jed. It might be my mum." Seeing a figure walk towards her, Jessica turned the beam down and squinted. She'd had terrible trouble finding her way here and had stopped on numerous occasions to ask for directions. Jessica breathed a sigh of relief as she realised the boy must be Jed. At one point, she'd wondered if he and Frankie had sent her on a wild goose chase, and was so glad that they hadn't. "Just park down the road somewhere. It's a bit muddy, but you'll be okay, won't you?" Jessica looked at her feet. In her frantic state of mind, she'd forgotten to put her shoes on, and was only wearing carpet slippers. "I've got me slippers on," she told Jed awkwardly. "Wait there," Jed said, as he legged it back to the trailer. "What's up? Was it me mum?" Frankie asked. She'd been looking out of the window, but it had started raining heavily again, and she couldn't see a thing. "Yeah, it is. Give us your trainers, Frankie. Your mum's got her slippers on, and it's like a swamp out there." Frankie giggled. "I'm a size 3 and me mum's a size 6. They won't fit her." Jed took them off of her anyway and ran back out to Jessica. "Try them," he said. Unable to get them on, Jessica handed them back to him. "Don't worry. If my feet get soaked, it won't kill me, will it?" Jed gave a half smile. "Just follow me and run. I've got a heater inside. I'll try and get the slippers dry for you before you drive back." Frankie felt nervous as her mother stepped into the trailer. "This is cosy," Jessica said politely, hugging her daughter. "Here, put these on," Jed said, handing her his socks and dealer boots to wear. "Thanks, love," Jessica said gratefully, as he put her slippers on top of the heater. "Make Mum a cup of tea," Frankie urged Jed. Jessica squeezed her daughter's hand. "So, how are you? Why aren't you staying at Jed's house?" "Jed's dad and Mum aren't there. His dad's gone to a horse fair and his mum's at her sister's. We was going to stay there, but Jed said we'd be safer staying here until his dad gets back." "Were you worried about your dad?" Jessica asked. Frankie nodded. "What are we going to do, Mum? Me and Jed don't want to have to live like this. I'm happy, and I want everybody to be happy for me. I want you, Joey and Dad to all be part of me and my baby's life." Seeing tears roll down Frankie's face, Jessica felt her own eyes well up. "Frankie, I promise you that I'll do my utmost to make your dad see sense. I can see that you and Jed are in love, and I want to support both of you, and the baby. With me being pregnant as well, our babies can be playmates, Frankie. I can babysit whenever you want. If you and Jed want to go out, I can—" Handing Jessica her tea, Jed shut her up in mid-sentence. "Look, I know you mean well, Mrs. Mitchell, but unless you sort that husband of yours out, none of this shit's going to happen, is it? I ain't having Frankie upset while she's carrying my child, so if things ain't smoothed out fast, I'm taking Frankie away and none of yous will ever see her again." Crawling along in the rain, Eddie stopped the motor, got out and jumped in the passenger seat of Raymond's motor. "Right, that's the place down there on the left. You know what you got to do, don't you?" Raymond nodded. "Take this, just in case," Eddie urged, as he handed him a small gun. "What do you want me to do with that?" Raymond asked. "Nothing. It's just for backup. Now remember, Ray, be as threatening as you can when you get there. If the door ain't open, then smash the fucking windows. You'll have to hit 'em hard, 'cause it's probably that plastic shit. That cocky pikey cunt is bound to stick up for himself, and I want you to clump him as hard as you can with a bat. Knock him out, so he don't wake up. Now you go first, and when I see you got Frankie and driven off, I'll go in and finish off the job." Raymond felt sick as he drove towards the trailer. Usually violence didn't bother him. He could kill a man in the blink of an eye, but not when it involved his own family. He didn't like Eddie's plan one little bit, but he was too frightened to argue. When Eddie Mitchell made his mind up to do something, there wasn't a man in the world who could change his mind. As the tyres screeched to a halt outside, Frankie screamed, grabbed her mother and got down on the floor. Jed took the knife he always carried out of his pocket and stood by the door. "Open this fucking door, now!" Raymond screamed menacingly, as he smashed the baseball bat against it. "Oh my God! It's Raymond! Your dad's gonna kill me! What am I gonna do?" Jessica whispered, sobbing. "Quick, hide in that room, Mum. There's a gap under the bed," Frankie urged her. As Jessica crawled into the bedroom, she shuddered as she heard the window go through. "Please, God, don't let anyone get hurt. Please, God, don't let anyone get hurt," she repeated, over and over again. Frankie screamed, as Raymond threw himself against the door and it flew open. "Leave us alone! Go away!" she screamed. Desperate to be the big hero, Jed lunged at Raymond with the knife. "You fucking mug!" Raymond yelled, easily knocking it out of Jed's hand. As Jed picked the kettle up, Raymond obeyed Eddie's orders and clumped him over the head with a baseball bat. He could have hit him harder, but guilt stopped him from doing so. All he wanted to do was stun Jed. It was Eddie's job to do anything else. Jed wasn't stupid, so he fell on the floor and played dead. "Jed! Jed!" Frankie screamed hysterically. As Raymond walked towards her, Frankie went for him. "Get off me! I hate you and me dad! I wish you were both dead!" she yelled, pummeling her fists against his chest. Raymond took the rope out of his pocket and carried out the instructions he had been given. "It's all right, Frankie. All I'm doing is taking you home," he said, as she repeatedly kicked and punched him. "Jed! Wake up! Please, wake up!" Frankie cried. As Raymond bent over with his back towards him, Jed held his forefinger to his mouth to tell Frankie to be quiet and to let her know he was all right. "I love you," he mouthed to her. Frankie bit Raymond's hand as he tried to gag her. Raymond felt terrible. He was cut out for most things, but not this shit. He was mad to have let Eddie talk him into this. He should have been a man and refused. Jed lay still as Raymond finally managed to tie and gag Frankie. He cursed himself for not bringing a proper weapon with him. Pretending he was knocked out cold was all he could do. Raymond was double his size and was armed with his infamous baseball bat, and Jed knew that Frankie needed him alive, not dead. Jessica was frozen with shock. She couldn't breathe, move, or anything. Her daughter's screams had been awful. She'd wanted to get up and help her, but she'd been paralysed by fear and couldn't. She felt faint again, really ill. Seeing Raymond bundle Frankie towards the car, Eddie picked up the machine gun and studied it. He'd never used one of these things before, but he was sure he could handle it. As Raymond's car pulled away, Eddie got out of his car and took a pop at one of the nearby squashed cars. Perfect, he thought, as the bullets landed exactly where he aimed them. Hearing the gun being fired, Jed quickly got up. It was obvious what was coming next, and he knew he had no choice other than to leg it. Raymond had smashed a couple of windows in the trailer, and realising the gunshots were coming from the front, Jed squeezed himself out of a back window and literally ran for his life. At the sound of the gun being fired, Jessica lost consciousness. Out for the count, she was totally unaware of her husband's footsteps nearing. In the back of Raymond's car, Frankie was desperately trying to pull the gag off her mouth. She'd seen her father waiting in the shadows as Raymond had lifted her into his motor, and not only was she worried about Jed, she was also concerned about her mother. Realising Frankie was making all sorts of funny noises, Raymond stopped the car. He had to check she was all right in case she couldn't breathe properly. Are you okay? Can you breathe? He asked, as he pulled the gag off her. You stupid fucking idiot! I saw me dad outside, and Mum's in that trailer. What? Raymond asked incredulously. Frankie was winding him up. She had to be. I swear on my baby's life, Mum's in there. She came to see me to sort stuff out. When she heard your voice, she hid under the bed. Realising that Frankie was telling the truth, Raymond felt all the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Jesus! No! He screamed, as he spun the car around and raced back to the scene of the crime. Eddie smiled as he saw the dealer boots poking out from under the bed. He would have liked to have tortured the little fucker for a while, but he really didn't have the time. Poor little Jeb must have crawled in here after Raymond clumped him over the bonce. Smiling, Eddie prepared his speech. Bye-bye, Jeddy boy. This is what you get for crossing me, he said, as he let fly with the machine gun. With blood splattered all over himself and the walls, Eddie decided enough was enough. He was extremely thirsty, and decided he needed to have a little refreshment before Raymond got back. The cleaning up process was much harder work than just killing people, unfortunately. Eddie went to the fridge, and was pleased to find a can of lager. Cheers, you little jippo cunt, he toasted, as he sat down on the old sofa. Sipping his beer, Eddie took a good look at the surroundings. So this is how pikeys live, is it? He said cuttingly. Smirking, Eddie slurped his beer. Frankie wouldn't thank him for a while, but he had literally saved his daughter from a life of hell. Any man in his position would have done the same as he had. Every father in the world only wants the best for their daughter, don't they? As the sound of brakes screeched outside, Eddie shot up like a jack-in-the-box. Raymond wasn't due back yet, so who the fuck was this? Eddie picked up the machine gun and lifted back the old net curtain. As he saw Raymond running towards him, Eddie guessed there had been a hitch, but still breathed a sigh of relief. Flat-nosed Freddy would have thought he was taking the right piss if he'd turned up with a boot full of bodies instead of just one. What's up? He asked, as Raymond let himself in. Where's Jessica? Have you seen her? Raymond asked frantically. Of course I ain't seen her. She's round her fucking mother's, Ed replied, looking at him as though he was mental. No, she ain't. Frankie said she was here. She came to see her, Raymond said nervously. Well, she ain't here now, is she? Eddie said, fuming that his wife had gone behind his back. Where's Jed? Raymond asked, as a sudden feeling of dread washed over him. Having a little rest under the bed. Don't worry, Ray. I've put about 200 bullets in him, so he's hardly likely to jump out on us, Eddie said, laughing. Raymond yanked open the bedroom door and breathed a sigh of relief as he saw a pair of boots poking out from underneath the bed. Thank God. You did see his face, didn't you, Ed? Raymond asked, confused. He could have sworn that Jed was barefoot when he had left. You ain't losing the plot, Ray, are you? You clumped him. He crawled under the bed. I came in, shot the cunt, job done. So what is your problem? Raymond felt ill as he turned to Eddie. Ed, Frankie reckons Jess crawled under the bed and was hiding there. Eddie stood up. My old woman don't walk around in dealer boots, he said, as he strolled into the bedroom. Grabbing hold of the ankles, Eddie was shocked as the boots came off in his hand. Seeing a pair of perfectly manicured feet, Eddie sank to his knees. No. No. It can't be. No, he shouted. Raymond pushed him out of the way, grabbed the legs and dragged the body out. As Eddie screamed out his wife's name, Raymond started to sob. Jessica! Jessica! I'm so sorry! I love you! Why did you come here? Why? Eddie howled, cradling her bullet-ridden body in his arms. Raymond was too stunned to speak. He could barely believe that his beautiful, vivacious sister was the bloodied corpse he was looking at. Jessica's body was lacerated beyond recognition. Her beautiful blonde hair was matted with blood, and her face looked contorted with shock. Oh my God, Eddie. What have you done? Raymond whispered. Sobbing like a baby, Eddie clung to his wife's lifeless limbs. Raymond tried to drag Eddie off his sister, and as he did so, Ed started to yelp like a wounded animal. Raymond stared at Jessica's face once more, then bent over and vomited. As Raymond's gun fell out of his pocket, Eddie immediately picked it up. Without Jessica, his life was nothing, and he knew he could never forgive himself or get over what he had done.
"It's all right, darling. I'll look after you and our baby. I'm coming with you," he said,
as he pointed the gun towards his temple. "No, Ed, no!" Raymond yelled, as he lunged towards Eddie. Outside in the car, Frankie was still tied up. She was frightened, thirsty, and desperate to know what was going on. As she heard the gunshot echo in the wind, she let out a piercing scream.
"Jed! Mum! Where are you?" she sobbed.
Chapter 43. Raymond crouched down. He'd managed to knock the gun away from his brother-in-law's head, but it had still gone off and had whizzed through Eddie's shoulder. "Stay with me, Ed. I'm calling an ambulance right now," Raymond urged him. Eddie lay moaning and groaning. He was conscious, but not really with it. "Let me die. I want to die," he muttered. Ignoring his pal's wishes, Raymond dialed 999. "Get me an ambulance. 2 people have been shot," he yelled, as the woman asked him which service he wanted. Taking off his jacket, Raymond laid it over his sister's mutilated body. "I love you, Jess," he said, tears rolling down his face. Knowing that the police were going to have a field day, Raymond's instincts kicked in, and he ran outside to untie Frankie.
"What's happened? Is Jed alive?"
his niece screamed. By now Frankie was absolutely hysterical, and Raymond had never felt so guilty in his life as he tried to calm her down. "Jed's fine. He got away. Now listen, Frankie, and listen carefully. The police and ambulance will be here in a minute. You say nothing to them, okay? All I'm going to say is me and you drove over here to look for your mum."
"I'm telling them everything. You and Dad are animals and I hate you both," Frankie bellowed.
Raymond slapped his hand around her face. She was in terrible shock and needed to snap out of it, else they were all going down. "You say nothing, Frankie. Do you hear me? Nothing."
"Where's my mum? I want my mum," Frankie sobbed.
Untying the last bit of rope, Raymond held his distraught niece in his arms. How was he meant to tell her that her dad had killed her mum? As the sound of sirens approached, he pleaded with Frankie to do as he had asked. "There's been an accident, Frankie. I'll explain later. Don't say anything to the police," he said, as he jumped out of the car. Both the police and paramedics were taken aback by the sight that greeted them. They were obviously trained to deal with these situations, but neither service had ever seen a woman with so many bullet holes in her body. Eddie was now out for the count, and was bleeding profusely. "Is he still alive?" Raymond asked, as Eddie was rushed into the ambulance. "He's still got a pulse, but we need to get him to hospital immediately. He's lost a lot of blood," the paramedic replied. Seeing the stretcher being brought out of the trailer, Frankie lost the plot.
"What's going on?"
she screamed, as she got out of the car and ran towards the ambulance. As Frankie tried to dart inside the trailer, a policeman grabbed hold of her. The police had been so shocked by the scene they had encountered, they hadn't even realised Frankie was there.
"Where's Jed? Where's my mum?"
Frankie yelled. "You can't go inside. It's a crime scene," the policeman told her gently. Raymond led his inconsolable niece back to the safety of the car. He had to tell her the truth before the coppers did the honours. Sitting Frankie in the passenger seat, Raymond crouched down and held her hands. "Mummy's dead, Frankie. I'm so sorry," he said, as another ambulance and more police backup arrived.
"Mum's not dead? What about her baby? She can't be dead,"
Frankie whimpered. "It was an accident, Frankie. I'm sorry," Raymond responded, hugging her fragile body in his arms. As white as a ghost, Frankie shook like a leaf.
"I want my mum. I need to see her,"
she screamed hysterically. The police came over to tell Raymond and Frankie that the ambulance was waiting to take them to hospital. "You'll be treated for shock. We're going to need to take statements from both of you later," an officer informed Raymond. Raymond nodded. He'd already told the police that he'd brought Frankie here to see her mum, and found Jessica and Eddie both shot. It's obvious someone wanted to kill them. Hadn't thought they'd succeeded, he told the shell-shocked copper.
I want Joey! Ring Joey for me!
Frankie wailed, as she was helped into the ambulance. Raymond sat opposite her with his head in his hands. How the hell was he meant to tell his mum and dad that both Jessica and the baby were dead? Unaware of the carnage, Jed was sat drinking a beer and soaking his sore feet in a trailer over in Basildon. Fearful of losing his life, he'd run for miles barefoot. He'd heard the gunshots as he had scarpered across the fields, but had no idea of what had actually happened. Finally, he'd come to a main road, had found a phone box and rung his cousin, Sammy Boy. His feet were ripped to pieces, and when Sammy arrived to collect him, he could barely speak through the pain. "Do you want another beer?" "How do you feel now?" Sammy asked him. Gratefully accepting the can, Jed opened it and drank most of the lager in one go. "I feel like shit, but I need to find Frankie. I want you to drive me to her house, and if she ain't there, then you'll have to take me back to Tilbury." "It's a bit risky if they got shooters, innit?" Sammy asked him. "If Frankie ain't indoors, I'll go to mine and get one of me dad's guns," Jed replied. Sammy handed him a fresh pair of socks and some trainers. "Come on then. Let's go." Many miles away, Joyce, Joey and Stanley were all of a panic as they headed towards Basildon Hospital. "There's been a terrible accident. You need to come quick. Frankie's asking for Joey, so bring him with you," was all Raymond had told them. Joey couldn't stop crying.
"What do you think has happened, Nan?" he wept.
"I don't know, darling,"
Joyce said, squeezing his hand. Raymond was pacing the corridors when he spotted his parents walking towards him. The doctors were worried about Frankie. She'd been that hysterical her blood pressure had shot through the roof, and they'd now given her a sedative to calm her down. Joyce and Stanley glanced fearfully at one another as they spotted the huge police presence.
"Is it Jess? Has she lost the baby?"
Joyce sobbed, as she was led into a nearby relative's room. A sombre-looking policewoman urged them all to sit down.
"Where's Frankie? Is she okay?"
Joey asked, shaking. Raymond begged the policewoman to let him break the terrible news to his family. "What's going on, son?" Stanley asked, his face stern. Raymond let out a cry.
"Jessica's dead," he sobbed.
"Dead?
"What do you mean?"
"She's dead?" Joyce asked incredulously.
"There was a shooting. No one knows exactly what happened, but Jessica's dead and Eddie's being operated on as we speak."
As Joey let out a piercing scream, Joyce collapsed with shock. Stanley stood up, and as his legs buckled, sank to his knees.
"I always knew that bastard would be the death of my Jessica. I always knew it," he howled.
Nearby in the operating theatre, Eddie's heart had just stopped beating.
"Cardiac arrest.
Start resuscitation," shouted one of the surgeons. Everybody crowded round. It was touch and go for Eddie Mitchell. Still unaware of the chaos, Jed and Sammy Boy headed straight to Frankie's house and were surprised to see her driveway swarming with police officers. Jed told Sammy to stay in the car. "Wait here while I ask the gabbers what's going on," he said as he slammed the car door.
"You can't go in there. No one's allowed in there," said a copper,
standing by the gate. He had been ordered to guard the property while his superiors searched for clues.
"What's happened?"
"I need to see my girlfriend. She lives here," Jed said bluntly.
"There's been an accident. That's all I can tell you,"
the copper replied. Jed was never one to be fobbed off. "Me and my girlfriend are getting wed. She's having my baby, so I need to know she's all right. Can you try and find out where she is for me?" Turning his back to Jed, the young officer spoke into his walkie-talkie. His girlfriend was also pregnant, so he felt some empathy towards Jed.
"Your girlfriend's okay. She's at Basildon Hospital."
Jed sprinted back to the car. "Basildon Hospital, as quick as you like," he yelled at his cousin. Back at the hospital, Joyce had been treated for shock. Seeing Joe and his father in absolute pieces, Raymond left the room. Their tears were pure and raw, and Raymond felt as guilty as hell. Outside, he punched the wall. He couldn't live this life any more. He pictured Jessica's face. It seemed so surreal that he would never see her, or hear her infectious laugh ever again. Memories of the past came flooding back to Raymond. He remembered Jess struggling to learn to ride a bike without stabilisers. How she took the piss out of his obsession with Mark Bolan. She'd been so supportive when he joined that band, and even stuck up for him when he'd worn eyeliner. Raymond sat on a plastic chair and toyed with his emotions. Grassing Eddie up to the police was a no-go. Many people would have done, but not Raymond. He was too loyal. He knew how much Eddie had loved Jessica. It was an accident, a mistake. Ed's life would be destroyed after this. It was a pure mishap, and Raymond would never tell a soul about the horrendous true happenings. As long as Frankie and Jed kept quiet, the police would just think that Jessica and Eddie had been attacked by somebody else. Seeing a copper staring at him, Raymond went back inside the hospital. Joey was curled up on the floor like a baby. "Get up, Joey." "Come on, mate," Raymond said, crouching down next to him. "Leave him alone. This is all your fault. You and that other fucking hoodlum. With the lives you and him led, something like this was always bound to happen. And it did. To my beautiful Jessica, who did nothing to deserve it. I hate what you've become, Raymond, and I'm ashamed to call you my son. Get out! Go on, get out! I never want to see your face again," Stanley shouted, pushing his son towards the door. Shocked at the venom in his usually mild-mannered father's voice, Raymond ran from the room. With no room in the hospital car park, Sammy parked his motor in one of the spaces marked for staff only. Jed had his thinking cap on during the journey. He guessed from the police presence at Frankie's that something sinister had happened, so he prepared himself a story. "If the Gathers say anything, then I'm going to say that you picked me up from Tilbury at 6 o'clock this morning. Me dad'd go mental, 'cause he owns that fucking land. Me truck's there and it's registered in his name, so the Gathers are bound to want to question him. Thank God I burnt them photos yesterday, Sam. Can you imagine the can of worms they could have opened?" "Are you sure you burnt them properly?" Sammy asked, worried. "Positive. I checked," Jed replied confidently. "Can I go and see my Joycey?" asked a red-eyed Stanley. "And can I see Frankie now?" Joey asked, distraught. Neither asked about Eddie, as neither really cared how he was. The nurse nodded. "Take no notice, if they're still woozy. It'll just be the medication we've given them," she told them. Joey sat down next to his sister's bed. "What happened, Frankie? Talk to me," he pleaded, as he stared into his sister's haunted eyes. Frankie squeezed his hand. She wanted to tell him the truth. Tell him that Raymond had kidnapped her. But she was still sedated, in shock, and unable to speak properly. A few doors away, Stanley clutched Joyce's hand. She was still sound asleep, but Stanley was sure she could hear him. "You should have listened to me all them years ago, Joycey. If Jess hadn't married Eddie, we wouldn't be mourning our daughter's death. We should have put our foot down when she was 17 and she first met him. I always knew he was a villain, a wrong 'un, and still I let her marry him. How are Frankie and Joey ever going to get over this, Joycey? Their lives are ruined and so are ours. I hope that bastard doesn't wake up. He deserves to die, not our Jess. I hate him, Joycey. I really do." Joyce's eyes flickered open. "You were right all along about him, Stanley. I'm just sorry I didn't listen to you," she mumbled. Unable to read properly, Jed kept stopping staff to ask them whether he was going in the right direction. "Go straight down the end of this corridor, then turn left," a nurse told him. As Jed and Sammy ran around the corner, they came face to face with Raymond. "Where's Frankie? What's happened?" Jed asked him. Raymond led Jed away from the old Bill. "This is all your fault, you pikey cunt. My sister's dead because of you. What are you doing up here anyway? Just do one, will you?" Ray said viciously. "If you don't tell me what's happened, I swear I'll cause a fucking riot," Jed yelled. Seeing the old bill had reappeared, Raymond realised that he had no option but to tell him. Frankie's not injured, but her mum's dead. Eddie's been shot as well. I don't know how he is, because no one would tell me. Jed looked at Raymond in astonishment. What happened? How did Jess die? I don't fucking know, Raymond spat. Seeing a copper walk over to them, Raymond put his arm around Jed's shoulder. Say nothing about what went on. Go and see Frankie and make sure she keeps stum as well, he whispered. Jed nodded and went in search of his girlfriend. The copper walked up to Raymond. Your brother-in-law's okay. I think he's in recovery. Raymond took a deep breath. Thanks for letting us know. How is she, Joey? Jed asked, as he sat on a chair next to Frankie. She's sedated. She's still in shock. What are we going to do, Jed? My mum's dead, Joey sobbed. As Jed stood up, Joey threw himself into his arms. Jed didn't know what to do. He was positive Frankie's brother was an iron, and he didn't really want to touch him. Move out the way, Joey. I want to talk to Frankie, he said awkwardly. As Jed held her hand, Frankie opened her eyes. I'm sorry about your mum. I'll look after you from now on. I promise I will. Is the baby okay? Have they checked you out? I'm having a scan in the morning. Please don't leave me, Jed. Stay here with me, she whispered. I'm going nowhere, Jed assured her. Eddie Mitchell woke up in the early hours. At first his brain was fuzzy, but within minutes he remembered everything. Jessica! Jessica! He cried, the tears rolling down his cheeks. The Irish nurse walked over to him. You're going to be okay, Mr. Mitchell. You had a nasty bullet wound and lost a lot of blood, but you're in the best place here. We'll have you back on your feet in no time. Are the police still here? Eddie asked groggily. The nurse nodded. Eddie was in a private room and the police were waiting outside the door. Can you tell them to come in? I have a confession to make, Eddie whispered. Raymond stood outside smoking another cigarette. The whole episode had been a nightmare and had made him take stock of his life. He had already planned what he was going to do. He was going to propose to Polly, settle down, and go straight. What he had seen in that trailer had put him off violence for life, and he would never forget the sight of his sister's mutilated body lying on that floor for the rest of his days. Are you okay, Uncle Raymond? Joey asked, as he walked up to him. Joey felt like a spare part now that Jed had arrived, and he couldn't wait to leave the hospital and grieve in peace. Raymond put his arm around Joey's shoulder. I think I should ring your uncles Paulie and Ronnie to tell them what's happened. They can tell Reg and Auntie Joan. They're all going to find out anyway. Joey nodded dumbly. His mum was dead, and nothing else really mattered anymore. Sergeant Lineker could barely believe his ears as Eddie Mitchell confessed to murdering his own wife. So it was mistaken identity? You thought that Mrs. Mitchell was somebody else? Propped up against his pillow, a tearful Eddie nodded. My daughter's pregnant. She's only 16 and I went there to shoot her boyfriend. I didn't know that my wife was there. And when I saw this big pair of dealer boots poking out from under the bed, I assumed it was Jed, Frankie's fella. My Jessica and me was so happy. She was pregnant again, and we were over the moon. I loved her more than anyone or anything, Eddie said. Sergeant Lineker glanced at his colleague. A full confession was the last thing they'd expected to come out of Eddie Mitchell's mouth. You get some rest. You need to speak to your solicitor tomorrow. We'll set the wheels in motion. As the two coppers left the room, Eddie covered his face with his hands and howled. He'd never admitted to a crime before in his life, but this was different. He had murdered his own wife and unborn child in cold blood, and spending the rest of his life in prison was what Eddie felt he deserved. Stanley walked back into the room where his wife was. "The doctor said that we can go home soon," he told her. Joyce sat up and clung on to her husband for dear life. "Come on. Let it all out," Stanley said, as she sobbed on his shoulder. He felt like crying himself, but had to be strong for her sake.
"What are we going to do without her, Stanley? She was my life,"
Joyce wept. Stanley felt his eyes welling up. "I really don't know, but we'll manage somehow, darling." "I'm going to pop outside with Sammy to have a fag. Shall I bring you a coffee back?" Jed asked Frankie. Frankie nodded.
"See if you can find Joey for me. He can sit with me while you're gone."
Jed nodded and left the room. "Your sister wants you," he told Joey as he walked past him. Outside, Sammy handed Jed a cigarette. "I might shoot off in a minute. Will you be all right here on your own?" "I'll be fine. Frankie will probably be allowed to go home in the morning, so I'll stop here with her," Jed replied. Sammy shook his cousin's hand. "You know where I am if you need me." "Ring me tomorrow," he said, as he went to walk away. Jed grabbed hold of him. "Sam, that thing we done, you must never tell anyone, especially not now. Promise me you won't." "I swear." "You have my word," Sammy replied. Jed leaned against the wall as his cousin walked away. Thank God he'd had the brains to burn them photos he'd stolen as souvenirs. No one but him and Sammy knew the truth. He hadn't even told his dad. Jed smiled as he thought back to that night. Murdering Harry Mitchell had been all his idea. He'd planned it with precision, and due to his cleverness, they'd got away with it. In Jed's eyes, Harry Mitchell had deserved to die. Butch, Jed's grandfather, had had his life ruined by Mitchell. Butch had never recovered from being shot in the foot. He walked with a severe limp from that day onwards, and spent the latter part of his life living as a recluse. Jed had plotted the operation from start to finish. He'd recruited Sammy's younger brother, Billy, and his pals to act as decoys. 6 times Jed had driven them over to Harry's and paid them 50 quid to cause mayhem. The boys had no idea what Jed was up to. He'd told them that the man had knocked him for money. "See that house over there? Number 31? I want you to hang about outside and make a nuisance of yourselves. Make sure all the neighbours see and hear you, but keep your hoods up at all times so they can't see your faces. You got to shout, scream, throw stones, knock on the doors. I need you to be as noisy as you can," Jed ordered. On the night of the murder, Jed had paid the boys their money, driven them back to Essex, then he and Sammy Boyd returned to Canning Town. They knew Harry was in, as they'd seen the lights go on and off earlier. Jed had chosen Christmas Eve for a reason. He knew there'd be loads of noise on the streets, therefore Mitchell's shouts and screams would blend in with those of drunken revellers. At 11 o'clock, Harry's house was in complete darkness. "Let's give it an hour. Make sure the old shit cunt's asleep," Jed told Sammy. Sitting across the road in the back of a hooky van, Jed and Sammy amused themselves by secretly poking fun at the merry worshippers heading off to midnight mass. At 11:45, Jed checked the coast was clear and told his cousin to follow him. "Right, put your gloves on and your hood up. Time to give old Harry boy his Christmas present," Jed whispered, as they crept through the alleyway that led to Harry Mitchell's back garden. Jed knew they'd have no problem gaining entry. He'd done his homework and was aware that Mitchell left the louvres open in the conservatory to let his cat in and out. Jed then expertly removed the louvres one by one, climbed in, then urged Sammy to do the same. Jed waited until he got to the lounge before he switched his torch on. Spotting the photos of young Harry with a pretty woman, Jed smiled. "Once we've finished him off, we'll take a couple of them pictures as souvenirs. We need to rough the place up a bit, make a mess, but we'll have to do it quietly," Jed whispered. Gesticulating for Sammy to follow him up the stairs, Jed clutched his baseball bat tightly in both hands. He'd waited a long time for this moment, and felt high on adrenaline. Harry's snoring sounded like a pig snorting, and Jed grinned as he tiptoed towards his bedroom. The door was open, and as Jed stood over the sleeping man, he was filled with a mixture of excitement and hatred. Glancing at Sammy, He lifted the bat in the air and smashed it as hard as he could over Harry's head. Instinct took over, and a dazed Harry staggered out of the bed and lunged at Jed.
"Who are you? What the fuck do you want?" he shouted,
as his feeble punches failed to connect. Jed hit Harry once more, and laughed as he fell to the floor.
"Not as strong as you thought you were, eh?" he goaded. "Tie up his arms and legs, then shine the torch on him," Jed told Sammy.
Recognising the accent was that of a traveller, Harry knew he was in trouble. For many years he'd slept with a gun under his bed, and his only hope now was to make a grab for it. With the 2 blows he'd received to his head, Harry was no match for his fit young attacker. Clocking Harry's hand creeping under the bed, Jed repeatedly stamped on it with his right foot. As Harry felt his wrist snap, he screamed out in pain. Sammy tied Harry's arms up.
"Who are you? One of the fucking O'Haras? I'm warning you. You kill me, and my Eddie will break every bone in your useless pikey body," Harry shouted.
Jed laughed as Sammy tied Harry's legs up. Harry reminded him of an oven-ready chicken.
"Sorry, did I forget to introduce myself? I'm Jed O'Hara, Butchie's grandson, and this is my cousin, Sammy. I take it you remember my grandfather?"
Annoyed that Harry didn't reply, Jed booted him in the head.
"Answer me, you old shit cunt!"
Harry was in so much pain he could barely speak.
"What happened with your grandfather was business. Nothing personal," he croaked.
"I'll give you fucking personal," Jed spat, tying the gag around Harry's mouth. Jed could sense Harry's despair. Watching him choking, trying to say something, Jed loosened the gag.
"Please, don't kill me. I beg you not to. If you kill me, you're signing your own death warrant. The feud between our families ended years ago. To start it up again now will cause an absolute bloodbath."
Jed tightened the gag once more. He had to finish what he'd come here to do.
"My grandfather turned into a hermit because of you. You killed his spirit. And now I'm going to kill yours. So go fuck your grandmother."
As Jed lifted up the baseball bat, Harry began to wriggle like a fish out of water.
"Hurry up, Jed. Finish him off and let's get out of here," Sammy urged his cousin.
Jed looked into Harry's petrified eyes and smiled.
"Happy Christmas. I hope you rot in hell," he whispered,
repeatedly smashing the bat over Harry's skull. As blood sprayed everywhere, Sammy felt queasy.
"Come on, Jed. That's enough," he said.
Even though he knew Harry was dead, Jed couldn't stop. His victim's head was already bashed to a pulp, so Jed started to smash the bat against his teeth. Frightened, Sammy grabbed Jed and pushed him against the wall.
"What are you doing? The old cunt's been dead 5 minutes. We need to get out of here, Jed. If we don't, we're both looking at prison."
The word prison seemed to snap Jed out of his violent trance. Checking he'd left no clues in the bedroom, Jed followed Sammy downstairs.
"Open a few drawers and throw some stuff on the floor. It has to look like a burglary," Jed said,
as he stuffed some photos inside his jacket. 10 minutes later, with the house looking completely ransacked, Jed and Sammy climbed out the same way they'd got in.
"Excuse me, do you know what the visiting hours are?"
Jed's daydream was ended by the woman standing in front of him. "Sorry? What did you say?" The woman repeated her question. "I've no idea. Ask a nurse," Jed told her. Taking the last drag on his fag, Jed flicked the butt into the air. Everything had turned out okay in the end. Harry was long gone. Jessica was dead. Eddie was looking at a life sentence, which meant Frankie and the baby were all his. Unable to stop himself, Jed began to laugh. He couldn't wait to tell his father that Eddie Mitchell had tried to shoot him, but instead had killed his own wife. For years his dad had banged on about getting his own back on the Mitchells, and now, without his dad even knowing, he'd done it for him. Jed grinned as he strolled back into the hospital. Thanks to him, the feud was finally over. The Feud, by Kimberley Chambers, was read by Annie Aldington.
The Feud is published by the Random House Group Limited, in association with AudioGo Limited. Copyright Kimberley Chambers, 2010. Kimberley Chambers has asserted her right under the CPDA 1988 to be identified as the author of this work.